I raised my son single-handedly after his mother passed, breaking my back to fund his entire life. But yesterday I opened Facebook and saw him in a tailored tuxedo kissing his new bride. I was not invited. Instead, he posted a picture with his wealthy white in-laws with the caption, "With the family that always supported me." I did not cry. I did not scream. I just finished my black coffee, walked to my old rusted safe, and pulled out the deed to the $1.2 million mansion he was currently living in. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach an ungrateful child a lesson they will never forget. My name is Alton. I am 69 years old, and this is how I dismantled my son's entire fake reality in less than 24 hours. It was a Tuesday morning like any other. The sun was barely creeping up over the horizon, casting long, pale shadows across the worn linoleum floor of my small, single-story house. I sat at the scratched wooden kitchen table wearing my favorite faded red flannel shirt, sipping my usual bitter black coffee. The house was dead silent, just the way I liked it since my beautiful wife Yvonne passed away 5 years ago. Out of sheer habit, I picked up my phone and opened Facebook. But the algorithm, in its infinite cruelty, placed my son Kendall right at the top of my feed. There he was, 32 years old, looking razor-sharp in a designer tuxedo, holding hands with Heather, his social climbing fiancée, who was now clearly his wife. They were standing under a massive, opulent floral arch at some country club overlooking a golf course. Flanking them were Greg and Susan Heather's parents, beaming with arrogant, possessive pride. I stared at the screen for a long time. There had been no text message, no phone call, no invitation mailed to my house. Just a public post for the entire world to see. But the real knife twist was the caption Kendall had typed below the photo, "With the family that always supported me." I read those 8 words over and over again until the letters started to blur together on the glowing screen. A heavy, suffocating weight pressed down on my chest, a physical ache that threatened to crack my ribs, but I refused to let my hands shake. I placed the coffee mug down on the table. The soft clink of the ceramic against the wood was the only sound in the room. Any other father might have thrown the mug against the wall, shattering it into 100 pieces. Any other father might have broken down sobbing, mourning the loss of the boy he had shielded from every storm since the day he was born. But I am not any other father. I spent 40 years as a commercial contractor building high-rises and dealing with the most cutthroat corporate sharks in the construction business. I learned a long time ago that anger is a completely useless emotion if it does not have a blueprint. I looked down at my rough, calloused hands, permanently stained with decades of hard labor, and then down at my faded, grease-stained jeans. To Kendall, to Heather, and especially to Greg and Susan, I was just a tired old black man living in a rundown shack. I drove a dented pickup truck with a tailgate that barely closed. I shopped with coupons. I was a relic of the past, an embarrassment to Kendall's new, shiny tech bro image. They saw my modest life as a blatant sign of failure. They thought Greg and Susan, with their leased Mercedes-Benz and heavily mortgaged country club memberships, were the true elites. They thought they were protecting my son from my poverty and my lack of sophistication. I stood up the wooden floorboards, creaking under my heavy work boots. The silence of the house felt completely different now. It was no longer the peaceful quiet of a lonely retirement. It was the terrifying calm before a demolition. I walked down the narrow hallway to my bedroom, bypassing the framed photographs of Kendall's college graduation. I knelt in front of my closet, pushed aside a pile of old shoeboxes, and revealed a heavy, fireproof steel safe bolted directly into the concrete foundation. I spun the dial, entering the combination with practiced precision. The heavy metal door clicked and swung open. Inside, there were no sentimental trinkets. There were stacks of legal folders, heavy and thick with power. I bypassed the commercial real estate leases, the mutual fund certificates, and the offshore trust documents that I had accumulated over decades of silent strategic investing. I reached for a specific red folder resting at the very bottom. I pulled it out and opened it on my unmade bed. There it was. The official notarized deed to the sprawling 5-bedroom, $1.2 million estate in the gated community where Kendall and Heather currently lived. The deed did not have Kendall's name on it. It did not have Heather's name on it. It bore my name. Alton. I bought that house for him 3 years ago in pure cash, hoping to give him a head start in life while his supposed tech startup was getting off the ground. I let him play the big shot CEO. I let him pretend to his new wife and her snobby parents that he was a self-made millionaire prodigy. I stayed in the shadows, perfectly content in my little shack, letting him take all the credit and all the glory. Beside the deed sat a stack of recent bank statements. My eyes scanned the top page of my primary checking account, noting the balance of just over $4.5 million in liquid cash alone. Right next to it was the ledger for my commercial properties, 3 busy shopping plazas downtown that generated more passive income in a single month than Greg and Susan made in an entire year of their pretentious corporate jobs. I picked up my phone again. The screen lit up with an automatic notification from my private banking app. A scheduled transfer of $4,000 was pending for tomorrow morning. It was the monthly allowance I quietly funneled into Kendall's business account disguised as a venture capital grant from an anonymous angel investor so his fragile ego would not be bruised. I had been subsidizing his entire fake elite lifestyle from day one. I was paying for the organic groceries in his fridge, the lease on his flashy car, and apparently the lavish wedding he had deliberately hidden from me to appease his racist in-laws. They thought my dirty work boots were a sign of poverty. They did not understand that visible wealth attracts leeches and creates fragile egos, while invisible wealth gives you absolute undeniable power. I did not shed a single tear. Tears are for victims, and I was nobody's victim. I picked up my phone and scrolled past Kendall's number. I had nothing to say to him. Instead, I dialed a number I kept on speed dial, the direct line to Bradley Cohen, the most ruthless real estate attorney in the city. He answered on the second ring. "Good morning, Alton. To what do I owe the pleasure so early?" His crisp, professional voice cut through the silence of the room. "Bradley, I need you to initiate a sale immediately. The property on Oakwood Drive, the one your son lives in." Bradley asked, a hint of surprise breaking his usual icy composure. "Yes. Put it on the market today. Cash buyers only. Price it to sell by the weekend. I also need you to freeze the shell company account and terminate the $4,000 monthly transfer to Kendall's business effective immediately." There was a brief pause on the line. Bradley knew exactly what this meant. He will lose everything, Alton. The house, the startup, probably his car too. I looked back at the Facebook photo on my phone screen, staring at the smug smiles of Greg and Susan standing exactly where I belonged. I know Bradley, but he does not need my money anymore. He has the family that always supported him. Make the call. The drive downtown took exactly 32 minutes. I parked my beat-up Ford F-150 between a sleek Porsche and a pristine Range Rover in the underground executive garage. Walking into the glass and steel fortress of Bradley Cohen's law firm, I ignored the bewildered look from the young receptionist sitting behind the marble front desk. She took one glance at my mud-caked boots and my faded flannel shirt, clearly assuming I was there to fix the plumbing or repair a broken light fixture. Before she could ask me to use the service elevator, Bradley Cohen himself stepped out of the frosted glass conference room. He was a man who billed $1,000 an hour, dressed in a custom Italian suit, but he crossed the lobby and shook my calloused hand with absolute respect. Bradley knew what the receptionist did not. He knew I was the wealthiest client in the building. He gestured for me to follow him, leading me down a silent, heavily carpeted corridor into his private corner office. The room was freezing, kept at a brisk temperature to keep negotiations sharp and emotions completely out of the equation. It was the perfect environment for what I was about to do. I sat in the high-backed leather chair across from Bradley's massive mahogany desk. He wasted no time. He slid a thick stack of legal documents across the polished surface, placing a heavy gold pen right beside it. "I appreciate you moving fast on this," I said, picking up the pen. Bradley leaned back, studying me with his sharp, calculating eyes. "When you called this morning, I had my team drop everything. The listing agreement for the Oakwood Drive estate is ready. We will price it 10% below market value to ensure a cash buyer scoops it up by Friday. I am also drafting the eviction notice for the current occupants, a standard 72-hour notice to vacate upon the close of escrow." I nodded, flipping to the signature page. "Perfect. Have the corporate buyers lined up. I do not care who takes it as long as it is out of my name by the end of the week." Bradley tapped his fingers together. "Alton, I have known you for 20 years. I have watched you build your empire brick by brick. But I need to ask you one final time as your legal counsel. Are you absolutely certain about this? Once you sign these papers, your son and his new wife will be on the street. They will have no legal recourse. They are not on the deed. They have no tenancy rights." I did not blink. I stared directly at the spot where I was about to sign my name. "I am certain, Bradley. Kendall is a grown man playing house with my money. It is time he learns the actual cost of his lifestyle." I pressed the pen to the paper and signed with a smooth, unbroken stroke. The house was gone. Now for the business accounts, I instructed sliding the real estate documents back to him. I want the shell company dissolved. Terminate the monthly $4,000 transfer immediately. Block all outgoing funds to Kendall's tech startup. Bradley pulled up a digital file on his monitor. Consider it done. The transfer scheduled for 9 o'clock this morning has been permanently halted. The credit cards linked to that corporate account have been deactivated. The funding is completely severed. You understand that without that monthly injection, his company will likely default on its server costs within days. Let it default, I replied coldly. If he is the tech genius he claims to be on social media, he will figure out how to keep his servers running. If he cannot, then he has no business running a company. Bradley printed the final confirmation of the account closure. He placed it in front of me. The finality of the paper was absolute. I signed it without a trace of hesitation. The financial umbilical cord that had sustained my son for over 3 decades was officially and permanently cut. I handed the pen back to Bradley. He carefully placed the documents into a manila folder, locking it inside his desk drawer. He looked at me with a rare expression of genuine sympathy. I have seen families tear each other apart over inheritance, Alton. I have seen greed destroy siblings and spouses. But seeing a son discard the father who funded his entire existence is a new level of arrogance. I just hope you are prepared for the fallout. The blast radius of this is going to be massive. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. I survived the housing market crash. I survived working 80-hour weeks in the blistering sun to build a future out of nothing. I can survive the temper tantrum of an ungrateful child. The truth about Kendall's tech startup was a joke that only Bradley and I were in on. For 3 years, Kendall paraded around the city attending networking events and taking Heather to expensive dinners, calling himself a founder and chief executive officer. He built a software platform that was supposed to revolutionize commercial real estate management. But Kendall was never a visionary. He lacked the discipline, the grit, and the basic understanding of the industry. Whenever his code broke, whenever his server architecture collapsed, he would casually mention the problem during our Sunday phone calls, pretending it was just a minor bug. He never knew that the next morning, I was paying a team of elite freelance developers out of my own pocket to quietly fix his mess before his investors noticed. He never knew that the $4,000 magically appearing in his business account every month was not an anonymous angel investor who believed in his vision. It was his father, working behind the scenes to keep the illusion alive. I had shielded him from failure at every turn, hoping the success would eventually build his character. Instead, it only built his arrogance. He convinced himself he was a self-made prodigy. He convinced Heather and her snobby parents that he was a brilliant catch, completely independent of the blue-collar father he was so deeply ashamed of. Without my silent intervention, Kendall was nothing but a man wearing a suit he could not afford. I had created a monster of entitlement. I gave him the luxury of believing his own lies. And the ultimate reward for my silent sacrifice was being erased from the most important day of his life, hidden away so I would not ruin his pristine upper-class aesthetic. That illusion was now officially over. The safety net was gone. Gravity was about to take over. As I stood up to shake Bradley's hand, a sharp vibration echoed in my chest pocket. I pulled out my phone and looked at the screen. It was Kendall. The caller ID showed he was dialing from Hawaii. He and Heather had flown to Maui immediately after the wedding for a 2-week luxury honeymoon, staying at a 5-star oceanfront resort that cost over $1,000 a night. A trip he was paying for using the corporate credit card linked to the account I had just obliterated. Bradley noticed the caller ID and raised an eyebrow. "Timing is everything," he murmured softly. I stared at the flashing screen. My son was likely standing at a front desk right now or sitting at an exclusive beachfront restaurant handing a piece of plastic to a waiter only to be told it was declined. I could picture the embarrassment washing over him. I could picture Heather looking at him with sudden confusion. I did not answer the call. I simply watched the screen light up, letting the phone ring until it finally went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, a frantic text message appeared on my screen. "Dad, call me back immediately. My card is not working and the hotel is threatening to lock us out of the suite." I locked my phone, slipped it back into my pocket, and walked out of the office. The first domino had just fallen. I reached my beaten-up Ford pickup, unlocked the door, and slid onto the cracked leather seat. My phone vibrated again. Kendall was calling for the 4th time in 3 minutes. I pressed accept and raised the phone to my ear, waiting in absolute silence. The panic on the other end was immediate and deafening. "Dad, what is going on with the bank?" Kendall shouted. His voice was frantic, completely lacking the polished, calm demeanor he projected to the world. "I am standing in the lobby of the Four Seasons in Maui. Heather is crying in the bathroom. The front desk manager just humiliated me in front of a dozen people. They told me my corporate card was declined. Not just declined, but flagged as a frozen account. I tried calling my developer team to see if the server hosting fees drained the balance, but nobody is answering my calls. You need to call your contact at the bank right now and fix this. They are threatening to lock us out of the penthouse suite and hold our luggage until we settle the balance for the last 3 nights. Do you know how embarrassing this is? Fix this right now. I sat in the driver's seat staring straight ahead at the concrete wall of the parking garage. The engine was off. The silence in the cab of my truck contrasted sharply with the chaotic breathing of my son thousands of miles away. I did not ask about the hotel. I did not ask about Heather or her tears. Instead, I pulled up the screenshot I had saved on my phone just hours ago. With the family that always supported me, I read aloud. My voice was completely flat. No anger, no sorrow, just a cold, hard recitation of the words he had typed for the entire world to see. There was a sudden chilling pause on the other end of the line. The frantic background noise of the Hawaiian resort seemed to vanish entirely. Dad Kendall stammered. His tone dropped an octave, the entitlement instantly giving way to a sickening wave of realization. Dad, listen to me. I can explain that post. It is not what you think at all. I waited. I wanted to hear exactly how he planned to justify erasing the man who had funded his every breath. Heather and I had to make some difficult decisions about the guest list. Kendall rushed on his words, stumbling over each other in a desperate bid for survival. Her parents, Greg and Susan, they paid for a huge portion of the catering. They have a certain image to maintain with their country club friends. You know how they are. They are very traditional. Traditional, I repeated. The word tasted like poison. I knew exactly what traditional meant to Greg and Susan. It meant a pristine, all-white aesthetic where a rough-handed, dark-skinned contractor from the wrong side of the tracks did not fit the visual narrative. Mom and Dad, Greg and Susan, they had a specific vision for the wedding photos. Kendall continued digging his grave deeper with every single syllable he uttered. It was a high society event. A lot of investors were there. People I need to impress for the startup. If you showed up in your work boots or started talking about construction, it would have clashed with the brand we are trying to build. I just needed everything to look perfect for the venture capitalists. I was going to call you when we got back. I swear. We were going to have a private dinner, just the 3 of us. You have to understand the pressure I am under to fit into Heather's world. I leaned back against the headrest. He was truly a coward. He was willing to sell out his own blood, his own race, and his own father to secure a place at a table built by people who despised him. You excluded your black father to make your white in-laws comfortable, I stated factually. You stood at an altar funded by my money, smiling next to people who looked down on you, and you publicly claimed they were your only support system. Dad, please! Kendall begged, his voice cracking with genuine terror now. It was just public relations. It was just a caption for Instagram. It does not mean anything. You know I love you, but I need you to unfreeze that account right now. Greg and Susan are flying out to join us for a celebratory dinner tonight. If I cannot pay for this suite, they will find out I do not have the liquid capital I told them I had. They think the startup is generating millions. If my card declines at dinner, Heather will be mortified. You cannot do this to me while I am on my honeymoon. Public relations, I echoed, keeping my tone deadly even. Well, Kendall, consider this a corporate restructuring. I am no longer your silent partner. I am no longer your safety net. The corporate account is not frozen due to a bank error. It is closed. The $4,000 monthly transfer is permanently canceled. The freelance developers you thought were answering to you have been formally dismissed. Your server will go offline at midnight tonight. But Dad, my company. Kendall gasped, the sheer panic strangling his words. Your company is a hollow shell, Kendall. It has never generated a single dollar of profit. I built it for you. I maintained it for you. I paid the bills while you played the chief executive officer. You wanted to impress Greg and Susan with your self-made wealth. Now you have the opportunity to actually earn it. You are 32 years old. It is time to step up and be the man you pretend to be on the internet. Ask Greg and Susan to pay your hotel bill. They are. After all, the family that always supported you. The silence that followed was absolute. I could practically hear the illusion shattering in his mind. The terrifying realization that he was stranded on an island with a wife who only loved his fabricated wealth and in-laws who only respected his fabricated status finally hit him. "You are ruining my life," Kendall finally whispered, his voice shaking with a pathetic mixture of fear and rage. "No," I replied smoothly, staring at the concrete wall. "I am simply handing you the exact life you earned." I pressed the red button on my screen, cutting off his frantic pleading instantly. I turned off the phone entirely and tossed it onto the passenger seat. I started the engine of my truck. The heavy rumble of the engine was a comforting, familiar sound. I pulled out of the underground parking garage and merged onto the highway, driving directly toward the affluent gated community of Oakwood Drive. The security guard at the front gate recognized my truck. I owned the property after all. He waved me through without a second glance. I pulled up to the sprawling $1.2 million estate. The manicured lawn was flawless. The massive oak doors were locked tight. I did not go inside. I did not need to. Within 10 minutes, a sleek white van pulled up behind my truck. Two men in work uniforms stepped out carrying heavy wooden posts and a massive professionally printed sign from Bradley Cohen's preferred real estate agency. I stood on the sidewalk, my arms crossed over my chest, watching as they positioned the posts perfectly in the center of the pristine front lawn. The heavy thud of the sledgehammer echoed through the quiet, wealthy neighborhood, each strike driving the metal stakes deep into the expensive soil. The bright red letters blared a single undeniable message to the entire street. For sale. Cash buyers only. I got back into my truck, leaving the sign standing tall in the morning sun. 3 days later, the immediate consequences of a frozen corporate bank account forced Kendall and Heather to abandon their luxury beachfront suite. They were forced onto a budget red-eye flight back to the mainland, humiliated and exhausted. They pulled up to the Oakwood Drive estate in a cheap rideshare vehicle, hauling their heavy designer luggage up the pristine concrete driveway. Heather was already fuming. Her expensive honeymoon tan was completely eclipsed by a mask of furious, exhausted rage over the hotel eviction. But the real shock was waiting for them inside. The massive oak front door was wide open. A blue lockbox hung uselessly from the polished brass handle. As they stepped into the grand marble foyer, the sound of overlapping voices and echoing footsteps drifted down from the upper floor. Kendall dropped his leather bags directly onto the floor. He rushed up the sweeping oak staircase with Heather right behind him. Her designer heels clicking frantically against the hardwood steps, they burst into the master bedroom, stopping dead in their tracks. A well-dressed older couple was currently measuring the dimensions of their custom walk-in closet with a tape measure. A real estate agent in a sharp-tailored navy suit stood by the panoramic window, casually pointing out the imported Italian tile to another prospective buyer. They were all completely unbothered by the sudden intrusion. "What in the world are you doing in my house?" Heather shrieked. Her voice pierced the calm atmosphere of the master suite, startling the prospective buyers. She marched toward the real estate agent, her face flushed with an ugly, furious red. "Get out of my bedroom right now. I am calling the police. This is illegal trespassing." The agent, a seasoned professional from Bradley Cohen's preferred firm, did not flinch. He calmly lowered his clipboard and looked at Heather with the practiced patience of a man who dealt with difficult foreclosures regularly. "Ma'am, there is no need to raise your voice," he said smoothly. "We are conducting a scheduled open house. The property was listed on Tuesday, and we already have 3 aggressive cash offers pending." Heather let out a short, hysterical laugh, looking at Kendall for backup. "Kendall, tell this idiot to get out of our house. Tell him you own this place." Kendall stood entirely frozen in the doorway. The color had completely drained from his face. He looked like a man standing on a landmine, terrified to move a single muscle. He opened his mouth, but absolutely no words came out. The agent did not wait for Kendall to find his courage. He pulled a crisp white legal document from his leather portfolio and held it out. "Actually, ma'am, neither of you owns this property. The legal owner is Alton, who retained my firm to execute an expedited cash sale. I have the signed authorization right here. Furthermore, according to the eviction notice posted on your front door 3 days ago, which someone clearly ripped down, you have exactly 72 hours from the close of escrow to vacate the premises. We close tomorrow at noon." Heather snatched the paper from his hand, her eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. Her breathing grew shallow and ragged. She turned her wild gaze to Kendall, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "What does he mean, Alton? Your father lives in a shack. You told me you bought this house before we even met. You told me you put the down payment down with your own tech money." Kendall swallowed hard, refusing to meet her furious eyes. "Heather, I can explain. It is just a misunderstanding with the trust fund setup. I am going to call my dad and straighten this out. He is just having an episode. The real estate agent stepped forward, reclaiming the document from Heather's trembling hands. There is no misunderstanding, sir. My client was very clear. He also instructed me to remind you that any damage to the fixtures, the appliances, or the property itself will result in immediate criminal charges for vandalism. The appliances belong to him. You are merely guests who have overstayed your welcome. Now, if you do not mind, these buyers would like to see the master bathroom. The prospective buyers exchanged highly uncomfortable glances and quickly shuffled out into the hallway. Heather was practically vibrating with rage. The entire illusion she had meticulously constructed for her friends, her family, and her social circle was being dismantled by a man in a navy suit holding a clipboard. Heather stormed out of the bedroom, stomping down the stairs and bursting out the front door. The commotion had not gone unnoticed. Several wealthy neighbors from the gated community were out walking their purebred dogs or checking their mailboxes. These were the exact people Heather had spent the last 2 years desperately trying to impress. She had curated a flawless, manufactured digital life. Every single day, her Instagram feed was flooded with perfectly staged pictures of her sipping champagne by the infinity pool, tagging herself as a proud CEO wife, claiming the estate was a testament to her and Kendall's brilliant young success. She had hosted lavish brunch parties on that very lawn, boasting about the expensive custom renovations they had supposedly funded themselves. Now the neighbors watched in absolute silence as the giant red for sale sign dominated the yard. They watched Heather, still wearing her wrinkled airport clothes, screaming at her husband on the driveway. They whispered among themselves, pointing at the open house balloons swaying gently in the breeze. The facade was completely shattered. The elite social circle she had sacrificed my presence at her wedding to penetrate now saw her for exactly what she was: a fraud, a squatter living in a house owned by the black father-in-law she had been too ashamed to invite to her country club wedding. The humiliation was absolute, total, and painfully public. Heather paced the length of the concrete driveway, her hands shaking so violently she could barely unlock the screen of her phone. She glared at Kendall, who was sitting heavily on his designer suitcase with his head buried in his hands, completely and utterly defeated. "You are totally useless," she spat, her voice dripping with pure disgust. "You are a broke, lying fraud. I am fixing this myself." She raised the phone to her ear, pacing furiously near the brick mailbox. "Dad!" she cried out the second the line connected. Her tone instantly shifted from a rage-filled shriek to the panicked, dramatic plea of a spoiled child. "Dad, you have to get over here right now. Kendall's crazy father is trying to steal our house. He hired some sleazy real estate agent and they are letting strangers walk through my bedroom." Yes, his father, the contractor. "I do not know how he forged the paperwork, but he is trying to illegally evict us. You need to bring your lawyer. You need to make this stop immediately. They are embarrassing me in front of the entire neighborhood." She paused, listening to the deep voice responding from the other end. Her posture stiffened with renewed, arrogant confidence. "Yes, bring Mom too. We are going to put this old man in his place once and for all." Heather hung up the phone and shot a venomous glare at the for sale sign. She truly thought her parents could simply bully their way out of a legally binding real estate transaction. She thought Greg and Susan's white-collar superiority would easily crush my blue-collar reality. She was severely mistaken. The trap was perfectly set, and they were walking right into it. I sat on my wooden front porch polishing an old set of chisels. The afternoon sun beat down on my small single-story house. My neighborhood was quiet, filled with working-class families, modest lawns, and vehicles that had seen better days. It was a place where people earned their living with calloused hands and tired backs. That peace was violently shattered when a silver Mercedes-Benz turned the corner. It glided down the street, moving far too fast for a residential road, and pulled up aggressively to my curb, its tires biting deep into the edge of my grass. The heavy doors swung open. Greg and Susan stepped out, looking like they had just walked off the cover of a wealthy country club brochure. Greg wore a crisp pastel polo shirt tucked into perfectly pressed khakis. Susan clutched a designer handbag tightly to her chest, her eyes scanning my faded siding and cracked concrete driveway with undisguised revulsion. She actually took a step closer to her husband, as if the very air in my neighborhood might contaminate her expensive perfume. They marched up my short walkway, their leather shoes echoing loudly against the pavement. They did not knock, they did not offer a polite greeting. They simply stood at the bottom of my porch steps, looking down their noses at me while physically standing below me. The sheer arrogance was almost impressive. "Look here, Alton, Greg started. His voice carried the booming, entitled authority of a man who was used to ordering waiters and valets around. I do not want to make a scene in a place like this. Heather called us in absolute hysterics. She is extremely upset about this little extortion stunt you are pulling at the house. Susan chimed in, wrinkling her nose as a stray gust of wind blew some sawdust from my porch toward her pristine outfit. We understand that Kendall has been trying to help you out financially, Alton. We know he bought that house to give himself a respectable foundation and a proper place in society. But trying to forge legal documents to steal it out from under him just because you are going through a tough time is pathetic. It is criminal behavior. I did not interrupt them. I simply laid my chisel down on my workbench and looked at them. They had completely bought Kendall's lie. They actually believed my son was the self-made millionaire who had been throwing me scraps out of the goodness of his heart. Greg sighed, shaking his head with a heavy dose of manufactured pity. I am a reasonable man, Alton. I know the economy is rough right now. I know people from your background often struggle with financial literacy and retirement planning. You probably saw how much money our son-in-law is making and got desperate. But resorting to property fraud against your own flesh and blood is low. I am willing to make this go away quietly without calling the police and ruining your final years. He reached into the breast pocket of his blazer and pulled out a sleek, leather-bound checkbook. He clicked a heavy gold pen and scribbled a number on the top check. He tore it out with a sharp rip and held it forward between his index and middle finger, extending his arm as if he were handing a soiled napkin to a garbage collector. Here, Greg said smoothly, a sickeningly generous smile spreading across his face. $10,000. That is a massive amount of money for a guy living in a neighborhood like this. It should be more than enough to cover your utility bills, fix up that rusted truck of yours, and get you back on your feet. In exchange, you are going to call that sleazy lawyer of yours, cancel this fake open house nonsense, and sign a quit-claim deed transferring the property entirely to Kendall and Heather by tomorrow morning. Take the money, Alton. Do not let your misplaced pride put you in a state penitentiary. Susan crossed her arms, nodding in furious agreement. It is a very generous offer, Alton. You should take it immediately before Greg changes his mind. You do not want to go to war with our family. We have the best attorneys in the state on retainer. We will bury you in legal fees until you lose this little shack too. I looked at the piece of paper fluttering in Greg's outstretched hand. $10,000. It was barely enough to cover the imported granite countertops I had personally paid to have installed in Heather's custom kitchen. The absolute blinding arrogance of these people was staggering. They marched onto my property, insulted my intelligence, disparaged my racial background, and genuinely believed they were playing the role of benevolent saviors tossing a coin to a beggar. I did not take the check. I stood up slowly, my heavy work boots thudding against the wood. I towered over Greg by a good 5 inches. The arrogant smirk on his face faltered slightly, his eyes darting to my broad shoulders, but he stubbornly held his ground. I walked over to my heavy leather work bag resting on the porch chair. I reached inside and pulled out a thick, certified copy of my federal tax returns from the previous fiscal year, securely bound in a professional legal folder. I walked back to the edge of the stairs and handed the heavy stack of papers directly to Greg. I suggest you keep your charity. Greg, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. You are going to need every penny of it to pay for your daughter's upcoming legal fees. He looked confused, glancing at the folder, but he instinctively took it. He opened the first page, his eyes scanning the dense columns of numbers and official government seals. Let me clarify a few hard facts for you, I said, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady. First, Kendall did not buy that house. I bought it in pure cash 3 years ago. His name has never touched the deed. Second, Kendall's startup makes absolutely zero revenue. I have been funding his entire fake lifestyle through a corporate shell company. That includes the $4,000 monthly allowance that paid for the catering at that country club wedding you were so incredibly proud of. Third, I highly recommend you look at line 11 of that tax document you are currently holding. Greg's eyes darted down the page. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. His jaw went entirely slack. The document detailed my adjusted gross income. It showed the massive, undeniable profits from my 3 commercial shopping plazas downtown, the heavy dividends from my investment portfolios, and the 8-figure capital gains from the sale of my construction firm. It was a number with 2 commas. Susan, noticing her husband's sudden, terrified paralysis, snatched the paper from his trembling hands. She let out a sharp, choked gasp. Her wide eyes darted from the multi-million-dollar figures printed on the official IRS document to my faded flannel shirt and grease-stained jeans, her brain completely unable to reconcile the two realities. My tax liability alone for the last quarter was triple your entire combined net worth, I stated, stepping down to the first stair so I was directly face to face with them. You drove over here in a leased car to offer me $10,000 to abandon my own $1.2 million asset. You insulted my race, you mocked my neighborhood, and you questioned my intelligence because you mistakenly believe that wealth only looks like country club memberships and tailored suits. You are broke, Greg. You live on credit cards, heavy mortgages, and pretension. I live on liquid cash and commercial equity. Greg opened his mouth, but his booming authoritative confidence had completely evaporated. He looked at the $10,000 check still pinched in his fingers, suddenly realizing how monumentally pathetic and insulting his offer truly was. He was a small fish who had just swum into the jaws of a leviathan. The legal eviction stands, I continued, my voice echoing with brutal finality. Your daughter and my son have exactly 72 hours to pack their designer bags and get off my property. I highly suggest you drive back over there and help them load boxes. And Greg, if you ever step foot on my property again, I will not show you my tax returns. I will have you arrested for criminal trespassing. Take your worthless check and get off my lawn. Greg dropped my tax folder onto the porch chair as if it were burning his hands. He grabbed Susan by the arm, dragging his stunned, completely silent wife back toward their silver Mercedes. They did not say another word. They practically sprinted down the walkway, the engine roaring to life before their doors were even fully shut. The car sped off down the street, fleeing back to the safety of their gated communities. I stood on my porch, picked up my chisel, and quietly went back to work. I barely had time to bring the chisel to the sharpening stone before the screech of expensive tires echoed down the street. The silver Mercedes had not even made it to the stop sign at the end of the block. It slammed into reverse tires, smoking against the asphalt, and shot backwards, stopping violently at my curb once again. Greg threw his door open, his face no longer pale but flushed with a dark, explosive purple rage. His fragile country club ego simply could not process a retreat from a man sitting on a wooden porch in a blue-collar neighborhood. Susan trailed behind him, her designer bag shaking in her grip. "You think you can humiliate us with some forged documents?" Greg shouted, marching right back up to the bottom of my steps. "You think printing out some fake tax forms makes you a king? I know your type, Alton. You are a bitter, washed-up laborer trying to shake down my family because your son married out of your league," Susan chimed in, her voice shrill and trembling with defensive anger. "You are just jealous of the life we provided for them. We are respected members of the community. You are nothing but a spiteful old man trying to ruin Heather's happiness because you were not classy enough to be invited to our country club." I did not raise my voice. I simply opened the heavy leather bag on my chair again and pulled out a thick black binder. I tossed it down the steps. It landed heavily at Greg's polished shoes. "I did not forge a single document," I said calmly. "But let us talk about what is truly fake. Open it, Greg. Go ahead. Look at the actual foundation of your daughter's perfect marriage." He hesitated, glaring at me, then bent down and flipped the binder open. The very first page was a carbon copy of the wire transfer that paid off Heather's student loans 3 months before the wedding. Next to it was the invoice for her imported Italian kitchen cabinets paid in full from my corporate account. "Oh, it gets better," I continued, my voice slicing through the warm afternoon air like a razor. "Flip to the vendor receipts from last month. You see that $10,000 deposit for the florist at their extravagant wedding, the one you proudly told all your elite friends you split with Kendall. My company paid Kendall's half. Your daughter's $5,000 custom wedding dress was paid for by a phantom bonus check I issued to my son just so he could keep up appearances for you." I watched Susan's jaw tremble as she looked over her husband's shoulder. The pristine, wealthy lifestyle her daughter had been flaunting on the internet was systematically being ripped apart, receipt by receipt. "Let us talk about the lease on the Tesla Model S parked in their driveway," I said, leaning forward against the wooden railing. "It is registered to my commercial holding firm, the purebred French bulldog your daughter parades around on Instagram for likes. I paid the $5,000 breeder fee because Kendall's account was overdrawn. Her luxury gym memberships, her high-end salon appointments, even the organic groceries in her refrigerator, all subsidized by a corporate credit card that I personally monitor. Did you really believe a 32-year-old kid with a tech startup that has 0 clients could afford a $1.2 million estate? He has not written a single line of working code in 3 years. I have been paying freelance developers to fix his broken software in the middle of the night while he takes your daughter to Michelin-starred restaurants on my dime. Heather's entire identity as a wealthy, successful chief executive officer's wife is a carefully constructed fairy tale sponsored entirely by my bank account. Every time you bragged to your country club friends about how well your daughter married, you were actually bragging about my money. Greg stared at the binder, physically shaking. The undeniable proof was right in his hands. Bank stamps, routing numbers, and corporate seals, proving that the black contractor they had openly mocked was the sole benefactor of their daughter's luxurious existence. "You raised a gold digger, Greg," I stated, my tone flat and absolute. "The only problem is she dug into the wrong mine. She thought she was marrying into new tech money. Instead, she married a dependent who survives solely on my charity. And as of this morning, that charity has officially dried up. The house is sold. The accounts are closed. Your daughter is currently sitting in a house she does not own, married to a man who does not have a single dollar to his name." Greg finally found his voice, though it lacked any of its former booming authority. "You cannot just destroy their lives like this overnight. There are legal protections. There are tenant rights. I will hire a team of litigators to bury this eviction in probate court for years." I let out a low, dark chuckle. It was not a sound of amusement. It was the sound of a predator recognizing a much weaker animal. "Greg, you spent your entire career sitting in air-conditioned conference rooms, moving paper around and playing golf. You think a threat of litigation frightens me. I built my fortune in commercial construction during the hardest decades this city has ever seen. Do you know what it takes to build high-rises in the 1980s? It takes negotiating with corrupt city inspectors, breaking mob-tied union strikes, and crushing rival firms who try to bleed you dry. I have sat at tables with men who would break your legs for looking at them sideways, and I walked away with their contracts. I did not accumulate a multi-million-dollar net worth by playing nice or being intimidated by soft suburban men in pastel shirts. If you try to tie up my property in court, I will personally fund a legal siege so relentless it will bankrupt your entire family. I will drag your daughter's name through every public deposition in this state. I will expose her fake lifestyle, your complicity, and Kendall's complete incompetence to every country club investor and socialite you desperately try to impress." Greg closed the binder. The aggressive red flush in his face had completely vanished, replaced by the pale, desperate realization that he could not win a financial or legal war against me. He was completely outgunned. He looked at Susan, a silent, frantic conversation passing between them. Then Greg pulled his phone from his pocket. He dialed a number and put it on speakerphone right there on my walkway. Kendall answered immediately, his voice frantic and panicked. "Greg, please tell me you talked some sense into him. Tell me you stopped the sale." Kendall listened to me very carefully, Greg said, his voice dropping to a low, cold whisper, completely ignoring my presence on the porch. "He is not going to stop the sale. He is completely irrational. But there is another way to freeze his assets and halt the transaction. We need to move immediately." "What are you talking about?" Kendall asked. "We file for emergency medical conservatorship," Greg said ruthlessly. "Your father is 69 years old. He is exhibiting severe paranoia, erratic financial behavior, and extreme hostility. He is clearly suffering from early-onset dementia. We get a friendly doctor to sign a preliminary psychiatric evaluation, and a judge will grant you temporary power of attorney by tomorrow afternoon. We can freeze the house sale on medical grounds and take control of his accounts." I stood on my porch listening to my own son pause for only 3 seconds before replying. "Okay, let us do it. Call the doctor." The very next morning, the heavy, impatient thud of knuckles against my front door echoed through the quiet house. I did not rush. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee, placed the ceramic mug on the kitchen counter, and walked toward the entryway with measured steps. I pulled open the heavy wooden door, letting the bright morning sunlight spill into the hallway. Standing on my porch was my son, Kendall. He looked exactly like a man who had not slept a single minute since our phone call. His designer clothes were severely wrinkled, his tie was loose, and his eyes darted around with a frantic, nervous energy. Flanking him on his right was a short, heavily sweating man clutching a worn leather medical bag. The man was dressed in a cheap, ill-fitting suit that screamed professional malpractice and back-alley deals. Standing directly behind them, looking entirely out of place and deeply uncomfortable on my property, were 2 uniformed police officers from the local precinct. The sheer audacity of the move was impressive in its absolute desperation. Kendall had actually followed through on Greg's dirty country club playbook. He had brought the law and a hired gun to my doorstep to officially strip me of my human rights. "Dad, please do not make a scene," Kendall started, immediately raising his hands in a placating gesture. He adopted the overly gentle, sickeningly condescending tone of a grief counselor speaking to a traumatized patient. His performance was meticulously calculated for the benefit of the armed officers standing behind him. "I brought help. We are all very worried about you. You have not been yourself lately. Canceling my business accounts, listing my house for sale out of nowhere, threatening Heather's parents on the street like a common thug. These are classic signs of a severe cognitive breakdown. We just want to make sure you are safe." The sweating man stepped forward, flashing a laminated badge that looked like it had been printed in a basement office. "I am Dr. Vance," he stated, his voice carrying a slimy, rehearsed authority. "I am a licensed psychiatric evaluator retained by your family. Mr. Alton, your recent financial decisions are highly erratic. They suggest a rapid onset of paranoia aggression and advanced dementia. I am here to conduct an emergency in-home cognitive assessment to determine if you require an involuntary psychiatric hold for your own protection and the protection of your estate." I stood firm in the doorway, my broad shoulders blocking their entry. I looked Kendall dead in the eyes, ignoring the fake doctor entirely. "I gave you everything, Kendall. I built your entire life. And your immediate response to losing your unearned allowance is to try and lock your father in a mental ward." "Dad, you are sick," Kendall pleaded, forcing a dramatic theatrical tremor into his voice. "You are hallucinating enemies everywhere. You think my startup is failing when it is thriving. You think Heather is using me for money. You are destroying our family because your mind is slipping. Mom would be devastated to see you acting like this. She would want me to intervene and protect you from yourself. Just let Dr. Vance ask you a few simple questions. If you refuse, the officers will have no choice but to escort you to the hospital for a mandatory 72-hour psychiatric evaluation. You are a danger to yourself." Using Yvonne's memory as a weapon to trigger an emotional response was a deeply pathetic strategy. Dr. Vance nodded gravely, opening his medical bag to pull out a stack of evaluation forms attached to a heavy clipboard. "The court takes these emergency petitions very seriously, Alton. If you do not cooperate right now, I will sign the declaration of incompetence on the spot based on your hostility and your son's sworn affidavit. We have the legal authority to freeze your entire estate pending a judge's ruling this afternoon. Do not make this difficult. Let us inside the house so we can resolve this quietly." They had planned a complete ruthless ambush. They intended to corner me in my own home, provoke a violent or angry reaction, and use my justified outrage as clinical proof of a mental breakdown. It was a textbook gaslighting operation designed to strip me of my wealth and my dignity in one swift, brutal stroke. I shifted my gaze past the fraudulent doctor and my treacherous son, looking directly at the two uniformed police officers. I knew them both. The taller one, Officer Davis, had a younger brother who went through the trade apprenticeship program I fully funded 5 years ago. The other, Officer Miller, used to patrol the commercial district where my construction crews built the new community center, a project I completed entirely at cost just to keep the neighborhood kids off the streets. I had donated the bulletproof vests they were currently wearing during a local precinct fundraiser. They did not look like men executing a righteous legal order. They looked like men standing on a ticking bomb, shifting their weight uncomfortably from foot to foot. Neither of them would meet my eye. Officer Davis swallowed hard, resting his hand awkwardly on his utility belt. Mr. Alton Davis muttered, his voice lacking any of the typical police authority. He sounded deeply apologetic, almost ashamed to be standing on my porch under these circumstances. "We are just responding to a dispatch call. Your son filed a formal wellness check and presented an emergency medical petition signed by a judge. By law, we have to escort the medical professional to the premises. We do not want any trouble here, sir. We know exactly who you are. We know what you have done for this community. But our hands are tied by the paperwork. We have to follow procedure." I understood their position perfectly. Kendall had weaponized the legal system, forcing good men to facilitate a dirty shakedown under the guise of police protocol. He thought leveraging the uniforms would terrify me into submission. He thought the threat of handcuffs would break my resolve. He vastly underestimated the difference between a man who projects fake power and a man who wields real authority. I did not panic. I did not raise my voice or give Dr. Vance a single ounce of the hostility he desperately needed to validate his fake diagnosis. Instead, I smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile that made Kendall instinctively take a half-step backward. The arrogant facade he was projecting suddenly cracked, replaced by a fleeting shadow of absolute terror. He knew that smile. He had seen me use it on corrupt city inspectors and rival contractors when I was destroying their careers. He knew it meant I had stopped playing defense. "I am perfectly fine, Officer Davis," I said smoothly, pulling the front door wide open and stepping aside to clear the threshold. In fact, I have been expecting this exact visit since yesterday afternoon. I am a firm believer in handling medical and legal matters with absolute transparency. Please come inside, all of you." Kendall and the fake doctor exchanged a confused, triumphant look. They mistakenly believed I had surrendered to the pressure. They crossed the threshold, stepping onto the hardwood floor of my living room, completely unaware they were walking directly into a steel trap that had been set hours ago. The officers followed closely behind, closing the front door. I turned toward the kitchen hallway, raising my voice just enough to be heard over the low hum of the refrigerator. "Bradley," I called out. "The medical evaluation team is finally here." The heavy, authoritative footsteps of leather dress shoes echoed from the kitchen tile. Attorney Bradley Cohen stepped into the living room holding a sleek black briefcase in one hand and a thick stack of court-stamped documents in the other. He adjusted his expensive silk tie and looked at Kendall and the sweating doctor with the chilling, dead-eyed stare of an apex predator about to decimate its prey. Bradley Cohen did not walk into a room. He commanded it. He moved to the center of my living room, the polished leather of his briefcase landing on my coffee table with a heavy, definitive thud. The entire atmosphere of the house shifted instantly. Officer Davis and Officer Miller visibly relaxed, stepping back toward the front door, recognizing that a heavyweight legal presence had just assumed absolute control of the situation. Kendall stood frozen, his eyes darting between me and my attorney, the arrogant smirk completely wiped from his face. The sweating, fraudulent doctor clutched his leather bag tightly to his chest, suddenly looking like a man who had brought a butter knife to a gunfight. "Good morning, gentlemen." Bradley began, his voice dropping to a glacial corporate pitch that sent shivers down the spine of anyone familiar with a ruthless courtroom. "For the record, my name is Bradley Cohen, senior partner at Cohen Sterling & Vance. I represent Alton in all personal, corporate and estate matters. I understand we have an unsolicited medical intervention occurring on my client's private property. Please, doctor, do not put your pen away. We want everything fully documented today." Kendall tried to regain his footing, stepping in front of the doctor with a forced, trembling bravado. "This is a family matter, Mr. Cohen. My father is clearly suffering from severe cognitive decline. We have a judge's preliminary order for an emergency evaluation, and you cannot obstruct a medical professional from doing his job. His paranoia is out of control, and he is liquidating assets he does not even understand he owns." Bradley did not even grant Kendall the respect of looking at him. Instead, he snapped the golden latches of his briefcase open. "We have absolutely no intention of obstructing a medical professional," Bradley stated smoothly, withdrawing 3 thick, professionally bound medical dossiers from his bag. "However, since you brought up the subject of cognitive decline, we decided to be proactive. Anticipating this exact, predictable country club legal tactic, my client underwent comprehensive psychiatric and neurological evaluations over the past 48 hours. Bradley dropped the first dossier onto the coffee table. The loud smack of the paper echoed in the quiet room. "This is a full cognitive assessment conducted by Dr. Eris Thorne, the chief of neurology at the state's leading research hospital. The results confirm my client possesses exemplary executive functioning, 0 signs of early onset dementia, and cognitive recall operating in the top 1 percentile for his age bracket. Dr. Thorne specifically noted that my client's brain function is sharper than most men half his age." He dropped the second dossier right next to it. "This is an independent psychological evaluation from Dr. Elena Rostova, a board-certified geriatric psychiatrist appointed by the state Supreme Court. Her sworn affidavit clearly states that my client exhibits absolutely 0 signs of paranoia. In fact, she noted his financial acumen is exceptionally brilliant, and his recent decisions to cut off hostile parasitic dependence are a sign of robust mental clarity, not illness. Recognizing a financial drain and eliminating it is the hallmark of a sane, competent businessman." Bradley pulled out the third and final dossier, holding it up directly in front of the sweating Dr. Vance. "And this final assessment is a comprehensive toxicology and wellness screening from a private diagnostic firm confirming my client is completely free of any mind-altering substances, heavy metals, or prescription mismanagement. He is medically and legally speaking of sounder mind than anyone currently standing in this room." The silence was absolute and suffocating. Kendall's mouth hung slightly open. He stared at the thick stack of irrefutable medical evidence resting on the table, realizing his entire scheme had been anticipated, dismantled, and destroyed before he even knocked on my front door. The narrative of the senile, confused old man was dead and buried. Bradley turned his piercing gaze to the hired doctor. "Now, Dr. Vance is it. I see you brought a standardized evaluation form. Please feel free to begin your assessment. However, I must remind you that any diagnosis you render today that contradicts the sworn affidavits of 3 of the most decorated medical professionals in this state will immediately trigger a formal investigation into your medical license for gross incompetence and fraudulent billing. Proceed whenever you are ready. Dr. Vance took a ragged step backward, the color draining entirely from his sweaty face. He looked at the formidable medical dossiers, then at Bradley's icy stare, and finally at Kendall. He realized instantly that he had been dragged into a high-stakes corporate legal war, and he was the designated collateral damage. Before you ask your first question, Bradley continued, his tone dripping with lethal precision, you should also know that my office filed a formal lawsuit at 8 o'clock this morning. We are charging you, Kendall and Greg, with conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse. It is a federal offense carrying mandatory prison sentences and severe asset forfeiture. We have officially requested the state medical board to subpoena all of your previous emergency evaluations, Dr. Vance. We intend to prove you operate a cash-for-diagnosis scheme catering to wealthy families looking to illegally seize trust funds. You are now a named defendant in a multi-million-dollar racketeering lawsuit. That was the breaking point. Dr. Vance did not utter a single word in his own defense. He shoved his clipboard roughly into his worn leather bag, zipped it shut with trembling fingers, and turned his back on my son. "Hey, wait!" Kendall shouted, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. "You cannot leave. Greg paid you a $5,000 cash retainer. We have a contract. You have to evaluate him." "I am issuing a full refund by the end of the day," Vance stammered, practically sprinting past the 2 police officers toward the front door. "I am not losing my medical license and going to federal prison over a family dispute. Find another doctor." He threw the door open and fled down the walkway, his cheap suit flapping in the breeze, leaving Kendall completely abandoned and entirely exposed in the center of my living room. Officer Davis cleared his throat, adjusting his heavy utility belt. "Well, since the medical professional has vacated the premises and the wellness check is clearly resolved, we have no further jurisdiction here. Have a very good day, Mr. Alton." The 2 officers swiftly exited, shutting the door behind them, eager to escape the radioactive fallout of Kendall's ruined scheme. Kendall stood alone in my living room, shivering despite the warmth of the morning sun streaming through the windows. His ultimate weapon, the country club strategy designed to strip me of my rights, had just shattered into a million pieces in his hands. Bradley calmly reached into his tailored jacket pocket and retrieved his smartphone. The screen lit up with a secure notification. He checked his luxury wristwatch, then looked up at my son with a smile completely devoid of warmth or pity. "Right on schedule," Bradley announced, his voice ringing like a final death knell in the quiet house. "Kendall, the temporary medical hold you and Greg attempted to file has been officially nullified by the preemptive evidence sitting on this table. Because no legal injunction was ever successfully placed on your father's estate, the escrow on the Oakwood Drive property successfully closed exactly 2 minutes ago. The funds are currently resting securely in your father's private holding accounts." Kendall swayed on his feet, the reality crushing the breath completely out of his lungs. He reached out to grip the back of my worn armchair just to keep himself from collapsing onto the hardwood floor. "The new legal owner of the estate is Vanguard Asset Holdings," Bradley stated, ruthlessly packing his dossiers back into his briefcase. "They are a corporate conglomerate known for absolute zero tolerance regarding squatters. The 72-hour eviction notice stands, and the clock is ticking. You do not have a house. You do not have a startup. You do not have a trust fund. I highly suggest you go home and start packing your designer bags before the new owners send the sheriff to throw your belongings out onto the lawn." Kendall drove back to the Oakwood Drive estate in a complete suffocating daze. The drive felt like a silent death march. He parked his car on the pristine concrete driveway, the engine ticking softly in the quiet, wealthy neighborhood. As he walked heavily up the manicured stone pathway, his eyes locked onto the front porch. A bright neon orange piece of paper was taped securely to the center of the massive custom oak front door. The corporate seal of Vanguard Asset Holdings was stamped boldly at the top. It was the official legally binding 72-hour notice to vacate the premises. Heather was already standing on the porch. She was staring at the neon paper as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. She wore a silk bathrobe, her hair unbrushed, the flawless illusion of the perfect chief executive officer wife completely shattered. She reached out and ripped the paper from the wood, her hands shaking violently. "It is real," Kendall whispered, his voice hollow and defeated. My father actually sold the house out from under us. We have 3 days to pack whatever we can carry and leave." Heather crumpled the orange paper into a tight ball, her knuckles turning bone white. Her breathing grew heavy, ragged, and dangerous. "No," Heather hissed, her voice vibrating with a terrifying, unhinged frequency. "We are not leaving. This is my house. I decorated these rooms. I picked out the imported Italian marble for the foyer. I hosted the country club charity committee in that dining room. That old, pathetic man is not going to snap his dirt-stained fingers and take my entire life away. If I cannot have this house, absolutely no one is going to have it." She spun around and marched furiously through the front door, leaving Kendall standing paralyzed on the porch. Kendall rushed inside a moment later, only to find Heather standing in the center of the grand living room holding a heavy, wrought-iron fireplace poker. Before Kendall could utter a single word of warning, Heather swung the heavy iron rod with all her might. The poker smashed directly into the center of the 85-inch flat-screen television mounted above the mantel. The expensive screen shattered with a loud, explosive crack, raining sharp black shards across the pristine hardwood floor. Heather let out a guttural scream of pure, unfiltered rage. She turned her violent attention to the custom glass coffee table, bringing the iron poker down in a ruthless arc. The thick tempered glass exploded into thousands of pieces, sending jagged fragments flying into the expensive white velvet sofas. "Stop it!" Heather Kendall yelled, lunging forward to grab her arm. "You are going to get us arrested. Get away from me!" she shrieked violently, shoving him backward. "You promised me a life of absolute luxury. You promised me an empire. You are nothing but a broke, pathetic liar living on an allowance from a man you were too ashamed to invite to our wedding. I am not letting some faceless corporate buyer walk in here and enjoy the home I built." She swung the poker again, this time tearing a massive gash into the white velvet upholstery of the custom sofa. Feathers and synthetic stuffing spilled out onto the ruined glass. She marched into the chef's kitchen, her eyes wild with destructive adrenaline. She smashed the poker into the stainless steel front of the smart refrigerator, leaving a massive, ugly dent. She dragged the iron rod across the imported granite countertops, leaving deep, irreparable scratches in the polished stone. She grabbed a set of expensive crystal wine glasses from the open shelving and hurled them one by one against the custom tile backsplash. The sound of shattering crystal echoed through the massive estate like a war zone. "I bought these," Heather screamed, her face flushed bright red, sweat pouring down her forehead. "These are my wedding gifts. This is my kitchen. This is my furniture. They cannot evict me from my own property. I will burn this entire estate to the ground before I hand the keys over." Kendall cowered near the kitchen island, covering his face to shield himself from the flying shards of crystal. He was completely powerless to stop her. He watched in absolute horror as his wife systematically dismantled hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of high-end interior design in a matter of minutes. She battered the antique dining table, shattered the porcelain vases, and tore the silk curtains from their heavy brass rods. The pristine magazine cover estate was reduced to a chaotic, shredded wasteland. Heather stood in the center of the wreckage, panting heavily, the iron poker resting on the scratched floor. She looked around at the absolute destruction with a twisted, satisfied smile. "Let them try to sell a ruined house," she spat. The sharp, authoritative beep of the electronic front door keypad cut through the tense silence. The heavy oak door swung open. I walked into the grand foyer, my heavy work boots crunching over the shards of broken glass. Attorney Bradley Cohen walked calmly beside me, stepping carefully over a shredded silk pillow. We stopped at the edge of the kitchen, taking in the absolute devastation. Heather dropped the iron poker. A smug, defiant smirk spread across her sweaty face. "You are too late, Alton," she mocked, crossing her arms over her silk robe. "Your fancy corporate buyers are going to have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to fix this mess before they can move in. This furniture belongs to us, and I have every legal right to do whatever I want with my marital assets." I looked at the ruined velvet sofa, the shattered television, and the destroyed granite countertops. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached into the breast pocket of my flannel shirt and pulled out a thick stack of printed receipts. "You are deeply mistaken, Heather," I stated coldly. "You did not buy a single item in this house. You do not have a job, and Kendall's fake company never generated a dime. I bought the velvet sofas, I bought the television, I paid for the crystal glasses and the imported granite. Every single piece of furniture in this estate was purchased through my commercial holding company." I tapped the stack of receipts. "I have the itemized invoices right here." The appliances and the furniture were legally included in the cash sale to Vanguard Asset Holdings. You did not destroy your marital assets. You just committed felony destruction of corporate property. Before Heather could fully process the catastrophic weight of my words, the wailing sirens of 2 police cruisers echoed down the pristine street. The heavy red and blue lights flashed brightly through the shattered front windows. The smart home security system, which was entirely registered in my name, had automatically dispatched law enforcement the moment the acoustic glass break sensors were triggered by her rampage. 4 uniformed officers burst through the front door, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts. Heather immediately pointed an accusatory finger at me. "Arrest him right now. He is trespassing in my house. Officer, this man broke in and harassed us." Bradley Cohen smoothly stepped forward, completely ignoring her screaming. He handed the lead officer the official deed, the 72-hour eviction notice, and the itemized furniture receipts. The officer scanned the legal documents, then looked around at the devastating wreckage and the iron poker resting at Heather's feet. "Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back," the officer commanded sternly, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "You are being placed under arrest for felony vandalism and massive destruction of private property." Heather's arrogant smirk vanished instantly. "Wait, no. You cannot arrest me. I am the victim here," she thrashed and screamed as the officers firmly secured her wrists, marching her roughly out the front door and down the driveway in her silk bathrobe. The wealthy neighbors stood on their manicured lawns watching in stunned silence as the fake chief executive officer wife was shoved into the back of a police cruiser. Kendall remained sitting on the floor of the ruined kitchen, staring blankly at the shattered glass, his fake empire reduced to absolute rubble. Kendall remained sitting on the floor of the ruined kitchen, the flashing blue and red lights from the police cruisers fading down the street as they hauled his wife away in handcuffs. The absolute silence of the shredded mansion was broken only by the frantic buzzing of his smartphone resting on the cracked glass coffee table. He reached for it with trembling hands. The notification was an automated alert from his business banking application. It was followed immediately by a second, then a third, then a dozen more. "Your corporate account has been permanently restricted due to zero balance and withdrawn guarantor authorization." He opened the app, his thumbs slick with cold sweat. The account balance, which he had proudly shown off to Heather's parents just a month ago, now read 0. The revolving credit line was terminated. The payroll account was locked. The $4,000 monthly injection had vanished, triggering a ruthless cascade of automated payment failures. His cloud hosting servers, his software subscription fees, and his digital marketing retainers all declined simultaneously. The financial life support that kept his fake empire breathing had been violently unplugged, leaving him suffocating in real time. Before Kendall could even process the red zeros on his screen, an incoming call overrode the banking app. It was Marcus, the primary angel investor he had spent 6 months courting at exclusive golf clubs. Kendall answered the phone, desperate for a lifeline. "Marcus, listen. There is a minor administrative glitch with my primary bank." Kendall started, his voice pitching high with panic. Marcus cut him off immediately, his tone dripping with sheer unadulterated fury. "There is no glitch, Kendall. I just received a formal legal notice from Cohen, Sterling, and Vance. Your primary silent partner is pulling all funding and liquidating the holding company that backs your entire platform. The board is dissolving effectively today. I am pulling my equity right now before the creditors start circling and auditing the books. I suggest you call your lead developer immediately, because the entire back end of your software just went completely dark." Kendall dropped the phone from his ear, staring at the screen in pure disbelief. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the crunch of shattered crystal under his designer shoes. He rushed to his home office, tearing open his laptop. He bypassed his frozen bank portals and logged directly into the developer dashboard of his commercial real estate management software. The platform was his singular point of pride, the complex code he had bragged about writing from scratch to impress his wealthy in-laws. The system was entirely offline. He opened the back-end repository to see what his freelance team had done. For the first time in 3 years, he bypassed the visual dashboard and looked at the actual administrative commit logs. The truth hidden in the raw data hit him like a physical blow to the chest. The logs showed thousands of lines of complex architectural code updates submitted in the middle of the night. But it was not his code. Every single time Kendall had pushed a sloppy, broken update to the software, an anonymous administrative account had quietly rewritten the entire sequence within hours to prevent catastrophic client crashes. He dug deeper into the billing logs for the freelance team, The payments were not routed through his startup's internal revenue. They were routed directly from a commercial construction holding firm, my commercial construction firm. I had been standing in the doorway of his office the entire time, watching the devastating realization wash over his face. Bradley Cohen stood silently beside me, holding his leather briefcase. "You thought you were a software genius, Kendall," I stated, my voice echoing coldly in the empty room. "You thought building an app was as easy as typing on a keyboard in an expensive coffee shop and handing out business cards. You wrote terrible, fundamentally broken code that crashed every single week. Whenever you bragged to Greg and Susan about your brilliant updates, you were bragging about the work of 3 senior developers I hired out of my own pocket to fix your daily disasters. I rewrote your entire business model. I negotiated your server rates. I subsidized your payroll so your employees would not walk out on you. You were never a chief executive officer. You were a mascot wearing a suit paid for by the sweat of a black contractor you were too embarrassed to invite to your wedding." Kendall stared at the glowing laptop screen, the irrefutable digital proof of his own utter incompetence staring right back at him. His entire professional identity was a meticulously crafted lie, and I was the architect who had silently propped it up. As he watched the developer dashboard completely timed out, a gray error screen appeared. The servers had officially been shut down due to non-payment. His company no longer existed. His phone buzzed relentlessly on the desk. Internal company messaging channels were exploding. The few part-time employees he had hired for marketing and graphic design were demanding answers about their bounced paychecks. Within minutes, the messages turned hostile. One employee threatened to file a formal complaint with the state labor board, while another simply sent a message calling him a fraud before the communication channels went completely dead. He tried to dial his lead developer, the man he thought he managed, but the call went straight to an automated out-of-service message. He had no product. He had no staff. He had no money. He was a 32-year-old man with a negative net worth and 0 actual marketable skills. The illusion of the elite tech founder was entirely vaporized, leaving behind nothing but an arrogant boy who had forgotten the man who fed him. He slowly closed the laptop, the screen snapping shut with a hollow, pathetic click. He was officially stripped of every single asset and achievement he had falsely claimed as his own. "Get your things," I commanded, turning my back on him. "The new owners change the locks at noon tomorrow. If you are still inside this house when they arrive, you will leave in handcuffs just like your wife." Kendall did not argue. He did not yell or try to justify himself. The fight had been completely drained out of him. He walked into his ruined master bedroom, grabbed a single canvas duffel bag, and numbly threw in whatever wrinkled clothes he could find among the shredded furniture. He walked past me in the foyer without making eye contact, dragging his bag out the front door and down the driveway toward his leased Tesla. He threw the bag into the trunk and climbed into the driver's seat. He had nowhere to go, no money for a hotel, and no credit to rent an apartment. There was only one place left where he thought he still held any value. He started the electric engine and drove out of the gated community, heading directly for the affluent suburbs where Greg and Susan lived. He genuinely believed that the family that always supported him would open their doors, hire lawyers, and welcome him with open arms. He believed his proximity to their whiteness and their country club status would save him from ruin. He was driving straight into the final, most brutal reality check of his life. Kendall drove through the winding, tree-lined streets of Greg and Susan's exclusive neighborhood, gripping the steering wheel of his leased Tesla so tightly his knuckles turned bone white. The sprawling colonial-style mansions sitting on perfectly manicured lawns had always represented the ultimate finish line for him. This was the world he had sacrificed his own father to enter. He pulled into the wide circular driveway of his in-laws' estate, the tires crunching softly against the decorative gravel. He killed the engine, grabbing his single canvas duffel bag from the passenger seat. He walked up to the towering front doors, straightening his wrinkled designer shirt, desperately trying to salvage whatever dignity he had left. He pressed the illuminated doorbell, listening to the soft melodic chime echo inside the massive house. He expected a warm embrace. He expected Greg to immediately dial a high-powered defense attorney to fix the nightmare. He expected Susan to usher him into the kitchen, offer him a stiff drink, and assure him that their family would protect him from his father's supposed insanity. He waited on the welcome mat, staring at the polished brass door knocker, completely unaware that his membership to their world had already expired the moment his bank accounts hit 0. The heavy door clicked and swung inward. Greg stood in the entryway wearing a pristine cashmere sweater and holding a crystal glass of bourbon. Susan stood just behind his shoulder, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her lips pressed into a thin, unforgiving line. Neither of them stepped aside to invite him in. Neither of them offered a welcoming smile. They looked at Kendall the way a homeowner looks at a diseased stray animal that has wandered too close to the front porch. "Greg," Susan Kendall started, his voice cracking with sheer desperation as he dropped his duffel bag onto the stone steps. "Everything is gone. My father lost his mind. He sold the house from under us. He froze all my corporate accounts. Heather lost her temper and broke some furniture, and my dad actually had the police arrest her. They took her away in handcuffs. I need your help to bail her out. I need to contact your legal team. I need a place to stay while we figure out how to sue him for control of the estate." Greg took a slow, deliberate sip of his bourbon. He did not look surprised. He did not look angry. He looked utterly disgusted. "Alton came to see us before he had Heather arrested." Greg stated, his voice completely devoid of the booming, jovial warmth he usually reserved for Kendall at the country club. "He showed us the tax returns. He showed us the receipts. He showed us the wire transfers that paid for your wedding, your car, and the very clothes you are wearing right now." Kendall froze. The blood drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking hollow and terrified. "Greg, I can explain that," he stammered, stepping forward, his hands raised defensively. "I am still the founder. The intellectual property is mine. I just needed some seed capital from him to get the infrastructure running. The business is viable. We are still family." "You are not family," Susan interjected, her voice sharp and venomous. Her face twisted into a sneer of pure, unfiltered elitism. "You are a fraud. You sat at our dinner table and let us introduce you to our friends as a tech prodigy. You let us brag about the mansion you supposedly bought. You made us believe you were actually one of the good ones. We thought you had transcended your background. We thought you were part of our class. But you are nothing. You are a parasite living off the charity of a blue-collar laborer." The thinly veiled racism that had always simmered beneath their polite country club smiles finally broke the surface. Greg stepped forward, blocking the doorway entirely, looking down at the man who had just married his daughter. "We tolerated the fact that you brought zero pedigree to this marriage because we believed you brought immense capital," Greg said ruthlessly. "We overlooked your father's background, his rough manners, and his complete lack of sophistication because we thought you had distanced yourself from all of that. We thought you had evolved, but you are exactly what we originally feared when Heather first brought you home. You are just a broke black man playing dress-up with someone else's money." Kendall physically recoiled as if Greg had punched him squarely in the jaw. The absolute cruelty of the words shattered the final fragile pieces of his ego. He had betrayed his own father, mocked his own heritage, and alienated his own blood, all to appease these exact people. He had swallowed their microaggressions for years, smiling through their condescending jokes, believing he was earning their respect. And in the end, the moment the money vanished, they reverted to viewing him as completely worthless. "I am your son-in-law." Kendall pleaded, tears of utter humiliation stinging the corners of his eyes. "I am Heather's husband. You cannot just leave me out here in the dark. I have nowhere else to go. My company is gone. My accounts are frozen. My attorney is already at the police precinct posting bail for my daughter." Greg replied coldly, swirling the ice in his glass. "When she is released, she will be coming back to this house. You will not be joining her. Our legal team will be drafting annulment papers first thing tomorrow morning. The marriage was based on financial fraud, which gives us plenty of leverage to completely sever the union and erase you from our lives." Susan glared down at Kendall's canvas bag resting on the porch. "Do not ever come back to this property, Kendall. If you ring this doorbell again, we will have the community security guards arrest you for trespassing. We do not associate with criminals, and we certainly do not associate with broke liars." Greg did not wait for a response. He simply stepped back and slammed the heavy oak door directly in Kendall's face. The loud final click of the deadbolt locking into place echoed through the quiet suburban night. Kendall stood entirely alone on the sprawling stone porch. He looked down at his shaking hands. The family that always supported him had just locked him out in the cold without a single second thought. He had traded an empire built on unconditional parental love for a hollow kingdom built on racial tolerance and fake wealth, and now he was absolutely bankrupt in every possible sense of the word. 4 hours later, the heavy metal doors of the municipal police precinct buzzed loudly and swung open. Heather stepped out into the damp, unforgiving night air. She had traded her ruined silk robe for a set of cheap, oversized gray sweatpants provided by the station, her hair a tangled, disheveled mess. Her manicured nails were stained with fingerprint ink. Kendall had driven straight to the precinct after being turned away by Greg. He was waiting by his parked Tesla, shivering in the cool wind, desperately hoping to salvage whatever was left of his 30-day marriage. He needed an ally. He needed someone to share the blame. Heather Kendall called out, stepping forward with a desperate, pleading expression, his arms wide open. "I am so sorry. We are going to fix this. My father is completely out of control, but we can fight him. I know a lawyer who will take the case on contingency. We can get the house back." Heather did not even break her stride. She looked at him with a level of absolute disgust that mirrored her father's perfectly. She walked right past him as if he were a piece of garbage discarded on the sidewalk. A sleek black town car hired by her parents was waiting at the curb, its engine idling softly. She pulled the rear passenger door open, refusing to look at the man she had sworn to love just a month ago. "You are dead to me, Kendall," she spat venomously. "You are nothing." She slammed the heavy car door shut, leaving him staring at his own reflection in the tinted glass. As the town car pulled away from the curb, leaving Kendall completely stranded in the precinct parking lot, Heather settled into the plush leather seat. She did not cry. She did not mourn her marriage. Her mind was already operating with cold, calculating precision. She pulled her phone from the plastic evidence bag she had just reclaimed from the front desk. She did not text her mother. She did not text her friends to complain about the humiliation of wearing handcuffs. Instead, she opened a new message window and typed in my phone number. "Alton," the message read, "we need to talk immediately. I have a proposal that will make Kendall disappear from your life permanently. Meet me tomorrow morning." I did not reply to Heather's late-night message immediately. I let her sweat in silence until exactly 7 o'clock the next morning, dictating the terms of our meeting to ensure she understood who held the power. I chose a gritty working-class diner on the far industrial side of town, a place filled with diesel mechanics, union carpenters, and night shift workers eating heavy breakfasts. It was definitely not the kind of establishment that served artisan lattes or organic avocado toast. At exactly 8 o'clock, Heather walked through the scuffed glass door. She wore oversized designer sunglasses to hide the dark circles under her eyes, clutching her luxury handbag tightly to her chest, as if the scent of bacon grease and stale coffee might permanently contaminate her clothing. She looked completely alien in this environment, scanning the worn vinyl booths with pure disdain until she spotted me sitting in the back corner. I was wearing my usual heavy denim work jacket and scuffed boots, nursing a mug of bitter black coffee. She slid into the booth across from me, refusing to take off her sunglasses. She did not offer a greeting. She simply crossed her arms and leaned forward, eager to treat this like a hostile corporate merger rather than a catastrophic family crisis. "Let us skip the pleasantries." Alton Heather started, her voice a sharp transactional whisper. Her entire demeanor had shifted dramatically from the hysterical, entitled woman screaming in my ruined living room just 24 hours ago to a cold, calculating negotiator. She was actively channeling the exact same ruthless, elitist energy her father used to intimidate his country club peers. "I know you have immense wealth. I know you have absolute financial control over Kendall. And I know you want to protect your commercial assets from a messy, drawn-out legal battle." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, placing the heavy ceramic mug back onto the scratched Formica table. "I am listening," I replied evenly, my face giving away absolutely no emotion. "My parents and their legal team are already preparing to file for an annulment based on extreme financial fraud." Heather continued, leaning closer across the table to ensure no one in the diner could overhear. "But the family court system is slow. Kendall is desperate, broke, and humiliated. He is going to try to drag this out. He will claim spousal support, demand alimony, and force a vicious public spectacle to embarrass my family. He will drag your name into the depositions too. He will expose your shell companies, your backdoor funding, and your aggressive real estate tactics. It will be a massive, humiliating public circus for everyone involved, and the media loves a story about a wealthy family tearing each other apart." She paused, letting the heavy threat hang in the air, trying to gauge my reaction to the prospect of public exposure. I gave her absolutely nothing. My face remained a mask of impenetrable stone. "But I can make it all go away very smoothly," Heather proposed, a predatory smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. "I am willing to sign a strict, ironclad, non-disclosure agreement. I will waive any right to contest the marital assets or demand spousal support. I will completely sever all ties with Kendall today Ignore his desperate calls and ensure my parents drop any civil litigation against your estate for the emotional distress caused by your son's ridiculous lies. I will walk away quietly, and you will never see me or my family again. And what is the exact price for this sudden burst of marital cooperation? I asked, my voice flat and dead. $100,000, Heather stated boldly, not blinking behind her dark lenses. A clean, untraceable cashier's check or a direct wire transfer by noon today. It is a standard exit fee. You pay me and I vanish. You get to keep your millions entirely intact, and you get to finally be rid of the demanding daughter-in-law you always hated. $100,000 is absolute pocket change for a man in your tax bracket, Alton. Think of it as a cheap severance package for dealing with your incompetent son. I stared at her, genuinely marveling at the sheer, unadulterated audacity sitting across from me. She was actively trying to extort the very man who had just orchestrated the complete destruction of her fake empire. She truly believed she held leverage. She thought the threat of public embarrassment would force me to open my checkbook, operating under the flawed assumption that I cared about country club reputations and neighborhood gossip the way her snobby parents did. You want me to pay you $100,000 to divorce a man who currently has a negative net worth, I clarified, keeping my tone perfectly level. A man you pledged to love for better or worse just 30 short days ago. Heather let out a short, cynical laugh, shaking her head. Love has absolutely nothing to do with this, Alton. This was a business arrangement that went incredibly sour. I am just trying to recoup my lost time and damages before I exit the partnership entirely. A business arrangement, I repeated, leaning back against the vinyl booth. I want to understand your business model, Heather. You met a black man with a fake software company and a leased car. You despised his background, and you clearly despised me. Your parents made their racial and class prejudices perfectly clear on my front porch. So why did you marry him in the first place? You and your parents are obsessed with pedigree and status. Kendall brought absolutely nothing to the table. Heather dropped her guard, entirely fueled by her own arrogant superiority and the belief that she had already won the negotiation. Because he brought the promise of a massive, undeniable inheritance, she admitted with chilling, robotic honesty. I knew his tech startup was struggling early on. I am not an idiot. But he showed me the deed to that million-dollar estate. He showed me the luxury lifestyle. He made it very clear that you were an old, broken-down laborer who had somehow stumbled into millions and that you were entirely hands-off with your wealth. My parents and I did the math. We figured you would pass away within the next decade, leaving Kendall with complete control over your commercial portfolio. I did not marry Kendall for his tech skills or his personality. I married him because he was a weak, desperate, easily manipulated heir to a massive fortune. We planned to step in and manage your assets the second you were out of the picture. But since you decided to pull the plug early and ruin everything I am cashing out now, pay the exit fee, Alton, or I will make this divorce a living hell for both of you. I looked at the woman sitting across from me. She had just openly confessed to predatory financial manipulation, extortion, and marrying my son purely to prey on my impending death. It was exactly the confession I needed to execute the next phase of my strategy. I reached into the breast pocket of my heavy denim jacket. I did not pull out a weapon. I pulled out a sleek corporate checkbook tied directly to one of my commercial holding accounts, the exact same account she had illegally used to fund her lavish lifestyle just weeks prior. I clicked my heavy gold pen and flattened the check against the diner table. You are a very practical woman, Heather, I said smoothly, writing her full legal name on the pay-to-the-order line with deliberate precision. I admire a person who understands exactly what they are worth. I filled in the box with a 1 followed by 5 zeros. I signed my name at the bottom with a firm, unbroken stroke, tore the check from the booklet, and slid it across the table. Heather snatched the paper instantly, a victorious, greedy grin spreading across her face. She looked at the 6-figure amount, completely blinded by her own perceived triumph. Pleasure doing business with you, Alton, she mocked, standing up and sliding the check securely into her designer handbag. Tell Kendall I said goodbye. She turned and strutted out of the diner, the bell on the door ringing cheerfully behind her as she stepped out into the morning sun. I did not move. I simply reached back into the breast pocket of my denim jacket and clicked the small, blinking red button on the digital voice recorder I had activated the moment she sat down. The entire extortion attempt, her malicious confession, and her admission of financial manipulation were captured in perfect high-definition audio. The trap was flawlessly set, and she had just walked straight into a federal offense. I did not hand the recording over to the authorities immediately. The legal destruction of Heather and her entire fraudulent family was already set in motion. But before the federal trap snapped shut on her, I had to deliver a much more personal, devastating lesson. I needed Kendall to hear exactly what his betrayal had purchased. My son spent the night sleeping in the cramped driver's seat of his leased Tesla in a brightly lit big-box store parking lot. The electric battery had drained significantly from keeping the climate control running all night. He woke up with a stiff neck, a rumbling stomach, and the crushing realization that he was effectively homeless. At precisely 9 o'clock in the morning, a sleek black town car pulled up next to him. A private courier employed by Bradley Cohen stepped out, tapped sharply on the tinted glass of the Tesla, and handed Kendall a heavy manila envelope through the cracked window. The courier walked away without uttering a single syllable. Kendall tore the envelope open with shaking hands. Inside was a sleek silver flash drive and a crisp white piece of paper bearing a single typewritten sentence. "Listen carefully to the family that always supported you." Kendall pulled his laptop from his canvas duffel bag, resting it against the steering wheel. He plugged the silver flash drive into the side port, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The screen lit up with a single audio file. He clicked play. The ambient clattering noise of a busy diner filled the cabin of his car, followed immediately by my calm, measured voice. Then Heather spoke. Her voice was not the sweet, supportive tone she used at country club dinners. It was the sharp, venomous, calculating whisper of a predator negotiating a ransom. Kendall sat completely paralyzed as he listened to his wife of 30 days offer to divorce him, abandon him, and erase him from her life in exchange for a $100,000 exit fee. He heard her mock his failing startup. He heard her admit with chilling, robotic clarity that she only married him because she believed I was a broken-down laborer who would soon die and leave him a massive commercial portfolio. But the audio did not stop there. I had intentionally let the recorder capture every piece of filth that spilled from her mouth. "You want to understand my business model, Alton," Heather's voice sneered through the car speakers. "I will tell you. You think I actually wanted to be tied to a black family forever. You think my parents wanted a black son-in-law in their country club photos. We tolerated his skin color because we saw the dollar signs attached to it. He was a convenient diversity project with a massive trust fund. He was desperate to fit into our world, and he was pathetic enough to turn his back on you to do it. He practically begged us to accept him. I overlooked his race because I planned to take over the commercial equity the second you were in the ground." Kendall squeezed his eyes shut, hot tears of absolute humiliation burning his cheeks. He listened to her laugh at him. He listened to her call him a weak, easily manipulated heir. He heard the unmistakable sound of my heavy gold pen scratching across the paper as I signed the six-figure check to buy her out of his life. He heard her smug, victorious sign-off before the diner bell chimed and the recording cut to dead silence. Every single word was a jagged knife twisting directly into his chest. The pristine, wealthy, socially elite wife he had worshipped was nothing but a racist opportunist who viewed his skin color as a temporary inconvenience to endure for a payday. The audio file ended, leaving Kendall in a suffocating, unbearable silence. The sleek, modern dashboard of his luxury car suddenly felt like a prison cell. He looked at his own reflection in the rearview mirror, and for the first time in his life he saw himself with absolute clarity. He saw a man who had traded his heritage, his dignity, and his devoted father for an illusion that despised him. He had spent years adjusting his speech, hiding his roots, and spending my hard-earned money to buy the affection of people who secretly mocked him behind closed doors. The sheer magnitude of his foolishness crashed down on him like a collapsing building. He was not a brilliant tech founder. He was not a respected member of the elite upper class. He was a pawn. He was a pathetic, insecure boy who threw away an authentic kingdom for a plastic crown. The absolute humiliation burned deep in his chest, replacing his sorrow with a sudden, violent surge of adrenaline. Every arrogant flex he made on social media, every time he smiled next to Greg and Susan, he was actively helping them dig his own grave. He wiped the tears from his face, slamming the laptop shut. He threw the car into gear, his tires screeching out of the parking lot. Heather was strolling out of an upscale boutique in the downtown commercial district, holding 2 designer shopping bags and looking exceptionally pleased with herself. She believed she had outsmarted me and secured her financial independence. She did not notice the white Tesla slam onto the curb inches from where she was walking. Kendall jumped out of the driver's seat, his face twisted in pure, unadulterated rage. He marched directly up to her on the crowded sidewalk, causing several pedestrians to stop and stare. Heather dropped her shopping bags, her smug smile vanishing instantly as Kendall hurled the silver flash drive directly at her feet. "You sold me out for $100,000, he screamed, his voice echoing off the brick storefronts. "You racist gold-digging fraud." Heather's eyes widened in sheer panic as she looked at the flash drive on the pavement, instantly realizing what it contained. She tried to maintain her elite composure, but Kendall refused to let her hide. He shouted every word she had said on the recording, broadcasting her racism and her extortion attempt to the entire street. The wealthy shoppers she tried so hard to impress stopped and gasped, pulling out their phones to record the spectacle. Heather shrieked back at him, her mask fully slipping as they engaged in a vicious, highly public screaming match. The 30-day marriage officially ended right there on the concrete, burning to the ground in a spectacular blaze of absolute public humiliation. While my son was having his highly public meltdown on the pavement, Heather managed to escape the scene in a rideshare vehicle, clutching her designer handbag tightly to her chest. She was battered, her social image bruised, but she still believed she possessed the ultimate trump card. She directed the driver straight to the main branch of her family's preferred wealth management bank. She strutted through the heavy revolving glass doors, completely ignoring the standard line of customers, and marched directly to the premier client desk. She slapped the check I had signed onto the polished marble counter. It was a perfectly executed cashier's draft for $100,000 bearing my corporate signature. She demanded the funds be cleared immediately and wired into a private offshore holding account she had set up to hide the money during the impending divorce. She smiled at the teller, her arrogant composure fully returning. She truly believed she had outsmarted the old, uneducated contractor. She thought she was walking away from the wreckage of her 30-day marriage as a wealthy, independent woman. She had absolutely no idea she had just voluntarily handed the federal government the final piece of evidence required to lock her in a cage. The young bank teller took the check, scrutinized the six-figure amount, and politely asked Heather for 2 forms of official identification. Heather sighed heavily, rolling her eyes as she handed over her driver's license and passport, acting as though this basic security protocol was a massive inconvenience to her incredibly busy schedule. She tapped her manicured fingernails impatiently against the cold marble counter, looking around the lobby to ensure people were noticing her high-value transaction. The teller typed rapidly, scanning the check into the financial system. Almost instantly, the teller's computer screen locked completely. A bright, flashing red security code appeared across the terminal. The teller's polite smile faltered into a mask of genuine concern. She excused herself, stating she needed the branch manager to personally approve a transaction of this magnitude. Heather crossed her arms, a smug, self-satisfied grin spreading across her face. She loved the fact that her transaction required managerial intervention. It made her feel important. It made her feel like an elite member of the financial class she so desperately craved to inhabit. 10 minutes passed. Heather's smugness slowly curdled into intense irritation. She tapped her designer shoe against the pristine tile floor, preparing to demand immediate service. The heavy oak door of the manager's office finally swung open, but the bank manager did not walk out to greet her with a complimentary cup of coffee. Instead, 2 tall men wearing sharp gray suits and stern, unyielding expressions stepped out into the lobby. They bypassed the teller counter entirely and walked straight toward Heather. They did not look like banking executives. They moved with the unmistakable tactical precision of federal law enforcement. Heather frowned, her annoyance morphing into sudden, sharp confusion. "Excuse me," she snapped, assuming they were cutting the line. "I am in the middle of a premier transaction. I need the manager out here right now." The taller of the 2 men reached into his breast pocket and produced a leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a heavy gold badge. "Heather Albright," he stated, his voice carrying a harsh, echoing authority that no country club bribe could ever silence. "We are special agents with the Federal Bureau of Investigation Commercial Financial Crimes Division. You need to step away from the counter and place your hands where we can see them." Heather froze completely. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a ghost standing under the fluorescent bank lights. "What is this?" she stammered, her voice suddenly shaking violently. "This is a massive mistake. I am depositing a legally acquired divorce settlement. My father is Greg Albright. You have absolutely no right to speak to me like this." The second agent stepped forward, completely unfazed by her pathetic name-dropping. He unclipped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. "We are not here to discuss your father, ma'am. You are being placed under federal arrest for aggravated wire fraud, commercial identity theft, and the unauthorized use of corporate credit accounts across state lines. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Heather shrieked, stumbling backward until her spine slammed hard against the marble counter. She lunged forward to snatch the $100,000 check back, but the first agent smoothly confiscated it, slipping the paper into a clear plastic evidence bag. "You cannot do this to me," she screamed, thrashing wildly as the agents grabbed her wrists and forced them roughly behind her back. The cold steel locked around her wrists with a heavy final click. The entire bank lobby fell dead silent. Dozens of wealthy clients stopped their transactions, watching in sheer disbelief as the perfectly styled, arrogant woman was humiliatingly subdued by federal authorities right in the middle of the financial district. I was sitting comfortably in Bradley Cohen's office when he received the confirmation call from the lead investigator. The trap I had laid in the greasy diner worked flawlessly. Heather thought I was just an ignorant old man who wrote her a check to make her go away. She did not realize that the specific commercial account I used to draft, that $100,000 payment, was the exact same corporate account she had been illegally bleeding dry for the past year. When Kendall's startup was supposedly thriving, Heather had secretly memorized the routing numbers and corporate card details attached to my construction holding company. She had been illegally routing luxury purchases, spa treatments, and designer clothes through dummy merchant accounts to hide the paper trail from Kendall. She committed federal wire fraud to fund her fake chief executive officer wife persona, assuming the anonymous corporate accounts would never be audited. By signing that specific check over to her, I created a direct, undeniable financial link. The moment the bank scanned the routing number on that check against her personal identification, it triggered a massive pre-coordinated fraud alert with the federal authorities who had been monitoring the compromised account for weeks. I did not just pay her to leave my son. I gave the federal investigators the exact jurisdictional hook they needed to arrest her for attempting to launder stolen corporate funds. She believed she had orchestrated the perfect extortion scheme, but she was nothing more than a rat greedily snatching cheese from a steel trap I had bolted to the floor. The audio recording of her confession in the diner was simply the final nail in her coffin, ensuring she could never claim the funds were a legitimate gift. She literally walked into a federal bank and handed them the murder weapon for her own financial execution. The fallout was absolute and merciless. Heather was formally denied bail due to the sheer magnitude of the commercial theft and her obvious status as a flight risk. She permanently traded her designer dresses for a standard-issue federal prison uniform. The news of her highly public arrest spread through the gated communities and country clubs like a devastating wildfire. The local evening news broadcasted the humiliating footage of her being shoved into the back of an unmarked federal vehicle, her face buried deeply in her handcuffed hands. Greg and Susan's manufactured elite social standing was obliterated overnight. Their wealthy friends, the very people they had desperately tried to impress by mocking my blue-collar background, instantly severed all ties with them. The country club formally revoked their membership, citing a strict morals clause violation to distance themselves from the radioactive federal scandal. Greg's corporate consulting firm forced him into an early, humiliating resignation. In a desperate attempt to keep their daughter out of federal prison, Greg and Susan mortgaged their pristine estate to the absolute limit to hire a massive white-collar defense team. They drained their savings, emptied their retirement accounts, and maxed out their credit. In less than 48 hours, the arrogant, racist family that had looked down on me from their porch was reduced to absolute financial ruin, drowning in debt and entirely isolated from the society they worshipped. The sky opened up later that evening, unleashing a torrential downpour that turned the streets of my quiet neighborhood into rushing rivers of gray water. I was sitting in my worn leather recliner reviewing the final structural blueprints for a new commercial project when the motion sensor alert on my front porch security camera chimed softly from my phone screen. I did not need to look at the live feed to know who was standing outside. I slowly stood up, walked down the short hallway, and pulled open the heavy wooden front door. The driving rain was blowing sideways across the yard, illuminated by the flickering yellow glow of the street lamp. Standing at the bottom of my wooden steps was Kendall. He was completely unrecognizable from the arrogant, impeccably groomed tech founder who had smirked in a tailored tuxedo just weeks ago. His expensive designer shirt was plastered to his skin, completely drenched and ruined by the mud. He dragged his heavy, soaked canvas duffel bag behind him, his shoulders slumped in absolute crushing defeat. He took 2 steps up the wooden stairs, his legs giving out completely. He collapsed heavily onto his knees on the hard wooden planks of my porch, the freezing rain violently battering his shaking frame. Kendall did not look up immediately. He stayed on his knees, his head bowed deeply against his chest, his hands gripping the wet wooden floorboards as if they were the only things keeping him from falling off the edge of the earth. When he finally lifted his face, the street lamp caught the deep, miserable anguish carved into his features. The rain washed over his cheeks, masking the heavy tears streaming from his eyes. "Dad," he choked out his voice, a ragged, desperate rasp, barely audible over the roaring storm. "Dad, I am so sorry. I am so incredibly sorry." I stood perfectly still within the dry threshold of the doorway, letting the cold wind whip past me. I did not reach out to help him up. I did not offer him a warm towel or a cup of coffee. I simply let him speak. "I lost everything." Kendall sobbed, his chest heaving violently. "They took my car. The bank froze the last of my personal accounts. Heather is sitting in a federal holding cell. And Greg threatened to have me arrested if I ever stepped foot near their property again. They threw me away like a piece of trash. They looked at me with absolute disgust, Dad. Greg told me I was just a broke black man playing dress-up with someone else's money. He said they only tolerated my race because they thought I was bringing a massive inheritance to their family." Kendall slammed a wet fist against the porch. "They never respected me. They hated who I was and they hated where I came from, and I knew it. Deep down, I knew they were looking down on me the entire time. But I was so desperate to be accepted into their elite country club world that I let them do it. I let them disrespect me, and worse, I let them disrespect you." His voice cracked, pitching higher into a wail of pure, unadulterated shame. "I was so embarrassed by this neighborhood, by your work boots, by the way you built your life with your hands instead of a corporate degree. I hid you from my own wedding because I was terrified they would see the truth and reject me. I sold out my own father, my own blood, just to buy a seat at a table with racists who were secretly plotting to steal the very money you worked your entire life to earn. I was a pathetic, insecure fool. I let Heather spend your money to build a fake empire, and I convinced myself I actually deserved it. When I saw those developer logs, when I realized you were the one quietly fixing my broken software in the middle of the night just to protect my pride, I felt sick to my stomach. I was parading around country clubs, calling myself a chief executive officer, while you were silently doing all the heavy lifting. I thought I was outsmarting everyone, but Heather and her parents were just waiting for you to die so they could steal your commercial portfolio. I handed them the keys to your life, Dad. I see it now. I see exactly what I threw away. Please, Dad, I have nowhere else to go. I have no money for food, no place to sleep. Please let me come inside. Let me come home. I will do whatever you ask. I will work for your construction crews. I will sweep the floors at your commercial sites. I will earn every single dollar. Just give me one more chance to prove I can be the son you actually raised." I looked down at the shivering, broken man kneeling on my porch. 40 years ago, if I had seen my child crying in the rain, my heart would have shattered. I would have rushed forward, pulled him into my arms, wrapped him in a warm blanket, and promised him that his father would fix the entire world for him. I would have moved mountains to ensure he never felt an ounce of pain or rejection. But the man crying at my feet was no longer the innocent child I had protected from the harsh realities of the world. He was a 32-year-old adult who had consciously, deliberately chosen to align himself with predators. He had willingly traded his integrity for a false sense of superiority. I felt absolutely no anger. The fiery, burning rage that had initially ignited when I saw that wedding photograph had completely burned itself out, leaving nothing but cold, hardened ash. I did not hate my son. I simply felt an overwhelming, profound detachment. The invisible, unbreakable cord that binds a parent to a child had been systematically severed by his own arrogance and entitlement. I realized in that quiet, frozen moment that rescuing him now would be the ultimate act of cruelty. If I opened this door and let him step into the warmth of my house, he would never learn the true weight of his actions. My past generosity was the exact poison that created this weakness in him. By shielding him from failure, I had prevented him from developing any real character or resilience. Sparing him now would only reinforce the toxic delusion that he was immune to the consequences of his own choices. He needed to feel the freezing rain. He needed to experience the terror of having absolutely zero safety net. I stepped forward, resting my hand on the heavy brass handle of the front door. The rain continued to batter the wooden porch, soaking the lower half of my denim jeans. Kendall stared up at me, his eyes wide and pleading, desperately searching my face for the familiar, unconditional warmth he had exploited for his entire adult life. He found absolutely nothing. "You learned a very hard lesson about the world today, Kendall. I stated, my voice echoing with a low, unwavering finality that cut directly through the noise of the storm. You learned that respect cannot be bought and dignity cannot be faked. You chased an illusion built on racial self-hatred and extreme greed, and you allowed yourself to be entirely consumed by it. I gave you every possible advantage a father could provide, and you weaponized it against me. Kendall let out a choked gasp, reaching a trembling hand out toward my work boots. Dad, please. I am your son. I looked down at him one last time, cementing the reality of the moment into both of our minds. You are my son, I replied smoothly, but you are no longer my responsibility. I stepped backward into the dry, quiet warmth of my home, breaking eye contact with the man on the floor. I pulled the heavy wooden door shut, the solid metallic click of the deadbolt locking into place, serving as the absolute irreversible end to his safety net. I turned away from the door, walking back toward my living room, leaving the storm outside exactly where it belonged. The fluorescent lights of the county family courthouse hummed with a sterile, unforgiving energy. 3 months had passed since the night Kendall knelt in the freezing rain on my front porch. Today was the final legal execution of his 30-day marriage. I was not in the room, but Bradley Cohen provided a meticulous second-by-second account of the proceedings. Kendall sat at the petitioner table wearing a wrinkled, off-the-rack suit he had likely purchased from a discount thrift store. He looked gaunt, completely hollowed out by the harsh reality of minimum wage survival. Across the aisle sat Heather. She was not wearing her custom bridal gown or the designer silk she loved so much. Because she had been formally denied bail, federal marshals escorted her into the civil courtroom wearing a standard-issue orange prison jumpsuit, her wrists secured in heavy steel transport chains. The smug elite confidence she once wore like a crown was completely eradicated, replaced by a desperate, feral panic. The judge presiding over the dissolution of marriage banged his wooden gavel, cutting through the tense, suffocating silence of the courtroom. The division of marital assets was officially on the docket. Heather's attorney, a junior public defender working entirely on a state mandate because her parents could no longer afford private counsel, stood up to present her demands. Despite wearing handcuffs and facing a decade in federal prison, Heather clung to her delusions of grandeur. She instructed her lawyer to aggressively petition for 50% of the marital estate. She wanted half the value of the Oakwood Drive mansion. She demanded 50% equity in the commercial real estate software startup. She petitioned for alimony based on the luxury lifestyle she had been accustomed to during their brief union. She sat at the defense table, glaring at Kendall with pure, unadulterated venom, fully expecting the judge to grant her a massive financial settlement she could use to pay her mounting federal restitution fines. Kendall did not flinch. He did not yell or argue. He simply handed a thin, plain manila folder to the bailiff, who passed it up to the judge's bench. The judge opened the file, his eyes scanning the certified financial disclosures, bank statements, and tax records. The courtroom fell completely silent as the magistrate reviewed the stark, undeniable mathematics of Kendall's existence. The judge cleared his throat, looking down at Heather with a mixture of professional detachment and absolute pity. "Ma'am," the judge stated, his voice echoing loudly against the wood-paneled walls, "you are petitioning for half of an estate that simply does not exist. The property located on Oakwood Drive was never registered to your husband. It was owned entirely by an independent commercial holding firm and was legally sold prior to the filing of this divorce. The tech company you referenced was officially dissolved 3 months ago due to severe insolvency and currently holds a valuation of absolutely zero. The luxury electric vehicle was repossessed by the dealership after 90 days of non-payment." Heather's jaw dropped. The color vanished from her face, leaving her looking sickly and pale under the harsh fluorescent lights. She rattled her heavy steel chains, struggling against the restraint. "That is a lie," she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure desperation. "He is hiding the money. His father is a multi-millionaire contractor. He has offshore accounts. You have to subpoena his father. You have to make him pay me." The judge slammed his gavel down, instantly silencing her outburst with the threat of a contempt charge. "The finances of the petitioner's father are completely legally separate and irrelevant to this proceeding," the judge declared sternly. "Furthermore, according to these certified audits, your husband currently possesses 0 liquid assets, 0 investment portfolios, and 0 real estate. What he does possess is $40,000 in outstanding personal debt from defaulted business loans and unsecured credit lines. Since these debts were incurred during the period of your legal marriage, you are not entitled to a financial payout. You are, however, legally liable for exactly 50% of his negative net worth. You owe $20,000. Heather collapsed back into her wooden chair, the breath completely knocked out of her lungs. She had married a man she despised solely to steal a fortune. Now she was shackled in a prison uniform, officially divorced, and saddled with $20,000 of his unsecured debt. The magnificent elite empire she tried to build through racial manipulation and sheer greed had collapsed directly onto her chest, crushing her completely. The reality of their new lives was a brutal masterpiece of poetic justice. Heather was escorted back to a federal holding facility where she would spend the next several years answering to the government for wire fraud and commercial identity theft. Her country club dreams were permanently traded for cinderblock walls and a rigid daily schedule dictated by prison guards. Greg and Susan, the architects of her elitist delusion, fared no better. To cover the astronomical legal fees of their daughter's criminal defense, they were forced to short-sell their pristine suburban estate. They lost their country club memberships, their leased Mercedes, and their social standing. They were currently living in a cramped two-bedroom rented apartment on the industrial side of town, completely ostracized by the wealthy, white-collar friends who had abandoned them the moment the federal indictments hit the evening news. Kendall's reality was equally stark. Without my silent financial safety net, he was forced to navigate the brutal, unforgiving world of unskilled labor. He now wore a bright green polyester uniform, working 50 hours a week as a food delivery driver. He spent his days navigating grueling city traffic, carrying greasy takeout bags up multiple flights of stairs for a few dollars in tips. His once manicured hands were now cracked and calloused from the harsh weather. He lived in a tiny, sparsely furnished studio apartment, counting every single penny just to keep his electricity turned on. The arrogance of the fake tech founder was completely scrubbed away, replaced by the bone-deep exhaustion of a man who finally understood the true crushing value of a single dollar. I did not attend the court hearing. I did not drive past Greg and Susan's miserable new apartment, nor did I order food just to watch my son deliver it. I sat comfortably in the leather chair of Bradley Cohen's office, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling city skyline. Bradley handed me the final court-stamped dissolution documents, proving that I was completely legally and permanently insulated from their radioactive fallout. My commercial assets were locked behind impenetrable trusts. My bank accounts were entirely secure. I had successfully executed a surgical amputation of the parasites that tried to bleed me dry. I felt no guilt. I felt no lingering anger. The storm had passed, leaving behind a perfectly clear, unobstructed view of my future. They had attempted to strip me of my dignity, my property, and my basic human rights simply because I wore work boots and carried a dark complexion. Instead, they had handed me the exact tools I needed to orchestrate their absolute destruction. I placed the court documents on Bradley's desk, picked up my heavy denim jacket, and walked out of the corporate building. I was entirely free. 6 months later, the crisp autumn wind carried the scent of roasted street food and fresh paint through the heart of the city's south side. I stood on a newly constructed wooden stage, looking out over a crowd of nearly 500 people gathered in the courtyard of the newly renovated community center. Banners draped across the brick facade flapped gently in the breeze. They bore a name that brought a profound, unshakable warmth to my chest. The Yvonne Memorial Trade School Fund. I wore my heavy denim jacket, the exact same one I wore on the construction sites that built my fortune, standing shoulder to shoulder with the mayor, local community leaders, and Bradley Cohen. The atmosphere was electric, vibrating with genuine, unpretentious joy. There were no country club socialites here. There were no leased luxury cars parked on the curb. This was a crowd of hard-working families, single mothers, and neighborhood kids who had grown up believing the world had entirely forgotten about them. I held an oversized pair of ceremonial brass scissors in my calloused hands. A thick, bright red ribbon stretched across the double doors of the main vocational workshop. I looked at the golden letters spelling out my late wife's name above the entrance. I stepped up to the wooden podium, adjusting the microphone. The murmurs of the crowd settled into a respectful, expectant silence. I looked at the sea of faces, focusing on the dozens of young black teenagers standing in the front rows. They wore plain t-shirts and scuffed sneakers, carrying the heavy weight of systemic disadvantage on their young shoulders. They reminded me exactly of myself 45 years ago, before the money, before the business empires, before the bitter betrayal of my own flesh and blood. Thank you all for being here today. I began, my voice echoing clearly through the courtyard speakers. My wife Yvonne believed that true power did not come from a tailored suit or a fancy zip code. She believed that true power came from having a skill nobody could ever take away from you. She believed in the dignity of callous hands and an honest day of sweat. For a long time, I lost sight of that. I tried to buy success for someone who did not understand the value of the dollar. I tried to build a roof over a foundation that was completely rotten. I paused, letting the harsh truth of my words settle over the attentive crowd. Bradley Cohen stood to my right, holding a large symbolic presentation check. "But today, we are laying a new foundation," I announced, gesturing toward the massive piece of cardboard. A few months ago, I liquidated a residential real estate asset, a sprawling $1.2 million estate in a gated community that served absolutely no purpose other than projecting a fake, toxic illusion of wealth. I took every single penny from that all-cash sale and I poured it directly into the concrete, the steel, and the expert instructors of this facility. The crowd erupted into thunderous, genuine applause. I held up my hand to quiet them down, leaning closer to the microphone. This $1.2 million endowment guarantees that for the next 20 years, any underprivileged youth in this district who wants to learn commercial plumbing, electrical engineering, structural welding, or heavy machinery operation can do so entirely for free. We are buying tools, not sports cars. We are building careers, not fake social media profiles. We are teaching these young men and women how to construct their own empires brick by brick so they never have to beg for a seat at a table that does not want them. I looked directly at the young teenagers in the front row. The world will tell you that success looks like a country club membership. They will tell you that working with your hands makes you a second-class citizen. They are lying to you. Real wealth is the ability to walk into a vacant lot and build a skyscraper. Real wealth is absolute financial independence. Starting tomorrow morning, these doors open. We are going to put steel-toed boots on your feet, welding torches in your hands, and give you the exact same tools I used to build my life. The applause that followed was not polite golf course clapping. It was a roar of genuine community triumph. I stepped back from the podium and grabbed the ceremonial brass scissors. The mayor and the local councilman gathered around me, smiling brightly for the local press photographers. With one smooth, deliberate motion, I sliced cleanly through the thick red ribbon. The fabric fell to the newly poured concrete, officially opening the doors to a future I was fiercely proud to fund. The money that had once poisoned my son's character was now completely purified, redirected into an engine of absolute opportunity. As the crowd surged forward to tour the state-of-the-art workshops, I remained on the wooden stage, shaking hands and accepting quiet words of gratitude from neighborhood parents. Out of the corner of my eye, far in the back of the crowded courtyard, I noticed a solitary figure standing near the wrought iron perimeter fence. It was Kendall. He was wearing his bright green polyester food delivery uniform, a heavy insulated thermal bag slung awkwardly over his shoulder. He looked exhausted, his posture stooped from the grueling, endless shifts of minimum wage labor. His designer haircuts were gone, replaced by a messy, unkempt fade hidden under a cheap company baseball cap. He had likely been biking past the community center on a delivery route when he heard my voice echoing from the courtyard speakers. He stood completely frozen behind the crowd, staring directly at the massive presentation check bearing the $1.2 million figure. That was the exact value of the mansion he had claimed as his own. It was the exact sum of the inheritance he had arrogantly assumed was his permanent birthright. Kendall did not push his way through the crowd. He did not shout my name or attempt to cause a scene to demand attention. He simply stood by the iron fence, his hands gripping the cold metal bars, and wept. Heavy, silent tears streamed down his weathered face, mixing with the sweat of his grueling delivery route. He was watching the magnificent, undeniable legacy that should have been his being handed over to strangers who actually possessed the humility and hunger to earn it. The absolute finality of his financial and familial loss was written in every line of his trembling frame. I did not break away from the crowd to go to him. I did not offer a comforting nod. I held his gaze for one brief, profound second across the sea of people acknowledging his presence, and then I calmly turned my back. The time for parental rescue had permanently expired. Before I could step down from the stage, a young black teenager with grease smudges on his jeans and a worn canvas backpack approached me. He looked to be about 16, possessing the lean, hungry energy of a kid who had grown up fighting for every single inch of ground. He reached out a rough, calloused hand, looking me directly in the eye with fierce, unmistakable respect. "Thank you, Mr. Alton," the boy said, his voice steady and serious. I have been working night shifts stocking grocery shelves just to help my mom pay rent. I never thought I would be able to afford a formal trade certification. I am going to be the first master electrician in my entire family. I took his hand, gripping it firmly, feeling the undeniable strength and potential vibrating in his youthful grip. "You are going to be a lot more than that, son," I replied, a genuine deep smile breaking across my face. "You are going to own the company." I watched the young man walk eagerly toward the open doors of the new workshop, his head held high. The fortune I had built with my own two hands had finally found its rightful place. The sun crested over the quiet rooftops of my neighborhood, casting a warm golden light across my wooden front porch. It was exactly 6 o'clock in the morning. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the faint scent of dew and damp soil. I sat in my heavy oak rocking chair, the rough wood familiar and comforting beneath my hands. I wore my usual faded flannel shirt and a pair of worn denim jeans. There were no urgent phone calls demanding emergency funds. There were no arrogant in-laws parked on my curb in leased luxury sedans. There were no manipulative daughter-in-laws plotting to extract my wealth from the shadows. There was only the gentle rustle of the wind blowing through the old maple tree in my front yard. I rested a heavy ceramic mug of bitter black coffee on the armrest, watching the neighborhood slowly wake up. A neighbor walked his dog down the sidewalk, raising a hand in a silent, respectful greeting. I nodded back, enjoying the profound stillness. This was the peace I had earned. It was the quiet, undeniable tranquility that only comes when you completely amputate a rotting limb to save the rest of your body. People often assume that cutting off your own flesh and blood leaves a permanent, agonizing void in your chest. They believe that a parent must endlessly forgive, unconditionally finance, and repeatedly absorb the betrayals of their children under the guise of family loyalty. I reject that completely. Sitting on my porch, surrounded by the absolute silence of my own autonomy, I felt zero regret. I did not mourn the loss of my son because the son I mourned had died long before I saw that wedding photograph on Facebook. The man I evicted from that mansion was a stranger who wore my son's face while operating with the heart of a parasite. I had spent decades laying bricks, pouring concrete, and outsmarting ruthless commercial developers to build a multi-million-dollar empire. My wife Yvonne stood beside me through every grueling phase of that journey. She scrubbed the dirt from my hands when I came home exhausted. She managed the ledgers at the kitchen table late into the night. We built our wealth with honor, integrity, and grueling discipline. I refused to let our lifetime of sacrifice be hijacked by a racist, entitled family who viewed us as nothing more than a convenient ATM to fund their fake elite aesthetic. By stepping back and letting Kendall's fragile, unearned world collapse, I protected the very core of Yvonne's legacy. I preserved the dignity of the empire we constructed together. The money that Kendall and Heather plotted to steal is now actively funding the futures of young men and women who possess the actual grit required to build this country. I watched my wealth transform from a toxic crutch into a powerful engine of opportunity. There is a deep, profound satisfaction in knowing that the commercial assets I bled for are secure in ironclad trusts, completely insulated from the grubby, incompetent hands of social climbers. I gave Kendall every tool a man could ever need to succeed. I gave him a world-class education, a fully funded startup, and $1 million home. When he weaponized those gifts to exclude me from his life and appease people who hated my race, he surrendered his right to my protection. The brutal education I provided him over the last few months was the final, and perhaps the most important lesson I will ever teach him. I forced him to meet the real world without a safety net. If he survives the fall, he will emerge as a man who actually understands the weight of a dollar. If he does not, that failure rests entirely on his own shoulders. My hands are completely clean. My conscience is absolutely clear. The sharp vibration of my smartphone against the wooden table broke the morning silence. I did not rush to answer it. I let it vibrate a second time before slowly reaching out to pick it up. The screen illuminated, displaying a text message from an unsaved number. I had deleted Kendall's contact information months ago, but I recognized the digits instantly. The message was brief. Happy 70th birthday. Dad, I am working a double delivery shift today, but I wanted to make sure I reached out. I miss you. I am trying to be better. I read the words carefully. There was no demand for money. There were no excuses. There was no manipulative plea for a second chance. It was simply the quiet admission of a broken man trying to rebuild his life from the absolute bottom. It was the message of a son who had finally realized the sheer magnitude of the empire he had burned to the ground. I stared at the glowing screen for a long moment. A faint, genuine smile touched the corners of my mouth. He was finally learning. The grueling shifts, the minimum wage, and the stark reality of survival were slowly carving character into a boy who had never possessed any. But realizing your mistakes does not automatically erase the consequences of your actions. Forgiveness does not require reconciliation, and learning a lesson does not grant you readmission into the kingdom you betrayed. I did not type a response. I did not send a thumbs up. I simply locked the screen, placed the phone face down on the wooden table, and pushed it away. I picked up my heavy ceramic mug and took a long, slow sip of my bitter black coffee. The warm liquid coated my throat as I looked out at the bright, clear blue sky. My perimeter was secure. My legacy was sealed. I breathed in the fresh morning air completely and utterly free. The ultimate lesson here is that financial generosity without strict boundaries does not breed gratitude. It breeds pure entitlement. We often confuse monetary support with parental love, believing that if we just give enough, our sacrifices will eventually be respected. But buying someone's comfort only strips them of their resilience and character. True love sometimes requires you to let the people you care about hit rock bottom, because a foundation built on unearned privilege will inevitably collapse. You cannot purchase loyalty, and you should never finance your own disrespect. Protect your peace, build your boundaries out of steel, and let the real world be their teacher. If you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace and dignity, share your story in the comments below and subscribe to the channel.